Elden Ring. High sales, high praise, high criticism. Today we'll be going through the top 5 best and worst aspects of Elden Ring and its major DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree, to see what make this combo the game it is, and what it means moving forward. Should be an interesting discussion at the very least, and I look forward to seeing differing opinions in the comments. Now some housekeeping notes. If you think I'm talking from a place of ignorance or delusion based on a lack of playtime, inexperience with the games, or that I've not gotten good, let me explain some things. At the beginning of the production of this video, I had over 600 hours in Elden Ring after beating it several times over and getting all the achievements, which to be fair, isn't that difficult. Then I cleared the game, as in defeating most if not all of the bosses, specifically the main ones, with 2 tank builds, 2 sorcery builds, 2 incantation builds, 2 arcane builds, 2 glass cannon builds, and 1 solo run as a cherry on top. This brought me up to almost 1,000 hours in the game in total. The first run of each of the pairs was played as I assumed how we were intended to play the game, so I explored accordingly, did little grinding, did not look up items, and simply used what I got when I got it. The second runs involved optimizing the builds through wiki research, item collection, and grinding as desired. They aren't the absolute pinnacle of each build type, but they worked well enough. The only summons I would use on these runs were the spirit ashes I picked up along the way. The additional solo run was a normal run with no specific rules besides no summoning whatsoever, and I ground out whatever I felt like at whatever time. In short, I got good with 5 different builds across 11 different runs over the course of over 300 hours of playtime, where I defeated every major boss and many of the minor ones in both the base game and Shadow of the Erdtree every time. If you want more, I'd kindly ask you to go hollow. This is on top of several hundred hours in each Dark Souls game, where I got all of their achievements and beat all of their bosses several times over as well. This isn't meant to say I'm the best at these games, far from it, but it is meant to show that I am experienced with these games and have several opinions about each of them and the From Software style as a whole by this point. We'll get to that soon. I also want to mention that we'll be going through this list from least to most important when it comes to the best and worst aspects of the game. Basically, we're counting down from 5 to 1 in terms of the hierarchy of pros and cons. We'll also be tackling the positives first, then the negatives. Just need to make that clear since several people seem to miss the details put into the description and timestamps of my older videos. Another small note is that some of these points will overlap across categories, so there may be some repetition here and there. Finally, you can find timestamps to take you to each point if you want to pick it apart, or see where I ranked what, so have at it at your own pace. However, I would advise watching the full video for context. Seems like a lot of people don't do that nowadays. Also, I fully expect to see the comments telling me to get good, or that I'm a Dark Souls 1 fanboy, and blah blah blah, the same old non-arguments I see in most Souls criticism comment sections, so have at it if you want to leave them. Just know that I am well aware of what's coming, and I don't care to engage with these non-criticisms, as it just wastes everyone's time and brain cells. Now let's get into the list itself. We'll begin the positive list by going over number 5, quality of life improvements, or efficiencies in the game. This includes various things that make the game work smoothly, or that help make some mechanics more efficient. First up is Sites of Grace customization. We can manage several resources from Sites of Grace, including our level, Ashes of War, Physic, Flasks, Great Runes, spells, tailoring gear, item management, and engaging with unique NPC dialogue. Most of these things help our run in that they let us do what we need to do on the go, so we don't have to warp anywhere to change our weapon abilities, level up our character, and so on. It's all conveniently right there at the many grace points around the map for us to use as we see fit, which obviously helps with the flow of the game since we can rest at a grace, replenish, and organize resources, then get right back into the game. Short, sweet, and keeps us moving forward. Next up is item management, specifically selling off junk. Elden Ring is massive, and there are a lot of things to loot in the game, some desirable, some not so much. What helps with this is the myriad of vendors around that will accept whatever we want to sell. This helps keep our inventory tidy, as well as giving us a little extra runes for some of the useful items these vendors sell, or we can hoard items to use for that extra supply of runes when we need them. This allows us to hold items, and also runes, for as long as we need to, and allows us to sell them at various points throughout the map. This also works well as several of these vendors will have valuable loot players will want, so we can sell off our junk, and in the process get runes we can use to buy the goodies each vendor offers. It's an efficient way to allow the player to clean up our inventory and build up resources to purchase other resources from vendors we find across the game. Next is an obvious one: travel. Elden Ring is massive in terms of its level design. which means we'll be walking, running, and riding to several places as we conquer the lanes between. This can become a burden if not for the things that help us move around. Torrent aids us in exploration with increased speed and double jumping capabilities to help us navigate this massive world. We also have a dedicated jump button which allows us to deal with more vertically inclined landscapes and structures. Granted, this isn't new, but is very helpful given where we go in the game. Both of these elements help in traversal and getting from A to B. Once we're at A or B, Sites of Grace become fast travel points, allowing us to bounce back and forth between almost every location in the game and go to special vendors and areas if we need to return to a vendor for a purchase we couldn't afford earlier, or return to an area we were exploring. This helps exploration for obvious reasons, as we don't have to trudge back through certain maps like we used to in some games. Next up are items that boost stats. These items increase our stats in one way or another, but also offer a trade-off. Some items that are worn will boost stats, but that means no fashion souls. Other items will boost a stat at the cost of defense, where our increased stats come with an increase in damage taken. These items help players get closer to the build we want much faster, by giving us that extra boost towards stat requirements for various weapons or spells, or they can be used just for a little extra oomph for our player. Next is small things around the world that help us continue playing the game without a need to rest. The flask scarabs around the map help to restore resources while we're going through an area. Defeating certain groups of enemies also gives a restoration of flasks, so we don't have to return to a site of grace every time. This keeps the player progressing and mitigates downtime. The next aspect is that the game is very open once we start a new game, so when we know where things are, we can begin the grind of getting all the seeds, tears, runes, and other resources we want for the build we're going for. This plays on one of the core elements of these games, where subsequent playthroughs become more engaging because we now know where things are. This allows us to try various strategies and builds that were not present in the first run, when we didn't know anything or where items were. This also gives players a leg up in terms of overcoming the challenges of the game, as we can grab plenty of resources for flask upgrades before we have to face any of the main bosses. Our final point for quality of life improvements is that the stats lead to various options depending on how focused or split your build is. Several builds are affected by the stat choices we decide, which also plays into the options available across different lanes of content. Magic builds gain access to several different types of magic, whether that be lightning, pyromancy, holy, physical, magic, or a status effect. The mixing and matching of our intelligence, faith, and arcane stats create whole new builds unto themselves. We can become a dragon mage when combining arcane and faith. We can become a lightning or flame spewer with faith only. We can become a frost god with intelligence. We can spew blood and rot with arcane. Or we can hybridize across various spells if we allocate levels across all three magic stats. This overlapping of these stats helps to maximize different build options without creating single-track usages that were common in previous games. Several games in the past kept things simple, where using magic revolved around dumping everything into a single stat, like intelligence and sorcery, or faith and miracles and pyromancy. Elden Ring overlapped these stats in a way that expands the options that players can have when they commit to using magic or special effects of any kind. Now let's go over number 4, balancing. We'll begin by going over a big one, combo endpoints. This refers to weapons having an endpoint, where the combo of attacks ends with enough time for the opponent to react. This allows the game to avoid an issue present in several of the older games, where our combo was only limited by stamina. This led to combo spamming tough enemies for as much as our stamina allowed, then backing off while it regenerated, then repeating the process. It was an incredibly boring way to deal with difficult enemies when it all boils down to the same stunlock system over and over. Elden Ring fixed this to allow enemies to have a moment to breathe, making combat more dynamic instead of a spam fest to see if our damage to stamina ration is better than the enemy health bar. This helps in boss fights, regular encounters, and multiplayer, showing how effective it was to rebalance combos so we can't hack and slash, dodge away, then repeat for victory. We have to consider our current combo's strengths and weaknesses in every situation now, and we're better for it. Next up is the inclusion of FP and all the rebalancing that goes with it. While Elden Ring didn't introduce this idea, it maintains the balancing from Dark Souls 3. We have to watch our HP bar, our FP bar, and our flask split as carefully as ever to make the most of our FP and what its inclusion does for different builds. If we don't care to use it much, we can ignore it and play as we wish. If we want to use it, we have several ways to use it effectively while maintaining the balance between our blue and red flasks, as well as our build choice. More magic-heavy builds will lean towards more blue milkshakes, while others will keep 1 or 2 for utilitarian purposes. The balancing is there, along with the pros and cons of committing to different amounts of each flask. This is on top of build choice, so many variations are affected by this balancing of FP to HP recovery and overall FP inclusion. The next point refers back to the quality of life section, where we have items that increase several stats, but come with a cost. As stated earlier, these items boost several stats, but usually increase damage taken or add other restrictions to account for this boost. Essentially, the item is doing the risk and reward system for you, along with increasing the divide between using the bonus effectively or failing to do so. The next point is a bit more conceptual rather than literal, but it deals with easy rune farming and how that shifts the game and changes throughout the game. Even when farming in Elden Ring, several spots depreciate significantly in value over time as the player increases their level. For example, the dragon farming from Grail's tail is super effective in the beginning, especially with the respawn method to bring the big gray back. Grail gives roughly 50 to 60k runes per kill, depending on items that boost rune rewards, but by the time we've killed the dragon 10 times, we're only getting a level or two per kill, and it takes a little time to kill Grail. This pushes the player away from grinding after a while, as the reward is tempered by tedium. This goes up a notch when we reach the next great grinding spot many players know of, Birdfall. This area's requirements are more demanding than Grail's, as we need to go through a questline to reach this bird farming spot early on. Once we find it, the enemy gives roughly 10 to 13k runes per kill every few seconds, again, depending on rune boosts. This is fantastic for farming, but also becomes tedious over time as we increase in level and the rewards diminish, just like before. Then we reach the uber farming method after defeating the Elden beast and grabbing its weapon to farm Albinaurix. This spot is fantastic for farming, as we can get anywhere from 30 to 50k runes every few seconds. This method is insane, but is counterbalanced by the fact that we actually have to beat the game to reach this point. This leads to the tedium mattering very little at this point, since we probably completed most of the endgame content by now. Obviously, the grinding depreciates as we level up in general, so this isn't something new for Elden Ring on that front. What this does for balancing involves the usefulness of farming versus progression. There comes a point in each Souls game where farming isn't worth it or isn't as helpful as actually progressing is. Elden Ring has this working in its favor because of the balancing of rune to enemy values scaling up like crazy by the time we hit the endgame. This means that progression looks more appetizing sooner rather than later compared to the other games, given that the scaling goes much higher in Elden Ring when compared to the previous games in From's catalog. This also doesn't include the crazy number of runes lying around to be picked up. These help with resource management, as we have a huge swath of runes we can save for later, ranging from a measly 200 to a whopping 80,000. Granted, their value to availability ratio drifts as we get into the more valuable runes, but that still makes for a very high scaling that the game relies on, given the ways to obtain several levels. These feed back into the point about farming, where farming becomes more tedium than useful, so we're encouraged to move on and engage with the content by virtue of the scale of the game's progression. Next up is the balancing of various spell types. We have many spells that layer on top of each other in a tier list of sorts, where the higher tier versions of spells cost more, but give greater rewards such as high damage, higher healing, etc. This also works in reverse, where the cheap spells are very cheap and are often effective during the earlier stages of the game. Balancing them depending on what we want to do and how effective it is dictates which spells we use and when. Sometimes a cheaper but slower option is better from a FP to damage or health ratio, but sometimes the opposite is true of you seeing an opportunity for a high cost, high reward move with a bigger spell you can use less often and have to use quickly. Again, it's that risk and reward balancing these games are built on, along with player strategy regarding what is available to them and how we choose to overcome challenges. Our last point for balancing goes over dual wielding, especially with colossal weapons. Dual wielding weapons requires stats like normal, but adds on a layer of endurance management to mitigate the drawbacks. The bigger the weapons, the heavier they will be on equip load and stamina drain. This is true even for smaller weapons, as we essentially double the equip load requirement of our weapons. This becomes doubly apparent when dual-wielding large weapons, as they will hit very hard, but will require high endurance to roll effectively and use in general. Combos while dual-wielding colossal weapons often allow a few massive hits in, but the weight and stamina cost are going to hurt if we use them too quickly. The balancing of dual-wielding comes from the balancing already present based on weapon type. Lighter weapons hit more often with lower stamina and equip load costs. This scales as expected, with larger weapons being slower, heavier, and more stamina draining as we go, but their damage also increases, hence the balancing. Dual-wielding just plays on the balancing that was already there and offers another layer on top of it all by deciding how best to combine weapons. Even if they are the same type but with different effects, dual-wielding adds a multidimensional approach to combat regarding how best to use either weapon on their own or together. Again, Elden Ring didn't create this, Dark Souls 2 did that, and then Dark Souls 3 experimented with paired weapons. Now we have a focused mechanic combining ideas of what came before, allowing more variety in combat regarding what we use and the options that come with using our weapons. Now let's get into number 3, options. We'll begin with a simple addition to the Dark Souls formula, stealth. Stealth adds an extra layer to combat by allowing us to deal increased damage to targets when we're undetected. While the stealth mechanics are extremely bare bones, and not new in and of themselves, they do offer a new dynamic into the mix when stealth may be the best way to deal with an encounter. This also plays into combat as stealth overlaps with the crouch function. This leads to unique attacks when crouched, some of which are quite effective, as well as another form of dodging being available along with jumping. Next is the introduction of crafting. This allows players to grab several different materials to use for items they can use in a variety of ways across the game. Instead of farming items from enemies or buying from merchants being the only way to get things, now there is an extra layer where players can farm materials that respawn relatively generously and create items on an as-needed basis. Holding on to supplies and waiting to craft them when we know we'll need them helps with player strategy and options, given what each item can do for the player. If we need extra healing, we have crafting for that. If we need certain damage types, we have crafting for that. If we need boosts to offense or defense, we have crafting for that. If we need something utilitarian, we have crafting for that. Most items in the crafting system work to aid the player in some way, or serve as a decent reason to pick up every item we see in the world, either for crafting or just to sell. Next is customizing weapons and abilities with Ashes of War, and how they are infused into the weapon or shield. We can manage what unique abilities several weapons have, as well as how the weapon is infused. This means we can have a weapon that has an Ash of War that makes it spin, along with the bleed buildup, or we can have that same weapon that now has an Ash of War that boosts our defense and deals additional lightning damage. Most weapons in the game include the option for this customization, which helps each build have increased options across various weapon types, Ashes of War, and what damage types are added to our weapons of choice. Not every weapon has this option, but that's largely restricted to items that already have a unique ability to begin with, like Malekith's Black Blade or Hand of Melania. These choices and the ability to change them quickly and often help to expand the options in combat, as many weapons can have very different levels of effectiveness across the different Ashes of War and added effects we can attach to them. This also helps as we gain access to several Ashes of War and a Wet Blade in the opening zone of the game, giving us these options early. Next is the value of Dragon Hearts and the spells they unlock. Instead of giving us individual spells per dragon kill, we get hearts we can use to purchase different dragon incantations at each of their shrines. This gives players options to go with cheap skills as soon as they get them, or save for more powerful and dynamic abilities. Now, not all dragon abilities are as varied as others, with some being different versions of the same ability with a damage type change, but all of them offer an option of some sort for differing abilities. Next is the Wondrous Physic. This item adds another dimension to builds as the abilities it gives us create opportunities for crazy effects. Take for example the old trope of hitting the Carillion Hidden tier to reduce all FP consumption for a limited time, and then spamming Comet Azure. This is just one of the many combinations that the Physic can affect, as it also can be used for stat boosts, damage increases, damage reduction, healing, and other utilitarian effects. It has a wide range of usefulness depending on player choice and build type, and how those two things play into each other. It can offer a saving grace if we need it, or can act as an opening move before we beat someone into the ground. The options for this item are largely effective and incredibly useful when popped at the right time. Next up is our old friend Patches being a quest giver and vendor if we spare him, or dropping a very good bell bearing if we kill him. Either way, we get the ability to unlock crafting the Gold-Toed Fowl feat, which we can use to increase rune acquisition. Having this early on is very helpful for giving the player options to grab his cookbook for the gold feat if they want that extra boost to runes through crafting a very simple item that helps consistently. Next we'll be getting into the level design, beginning with the options available at Stormveil Castle. Specifically, we'll talk about the main gate. We have the option to talk to an NPC who will allow the gate to be opened, allowing a more difficult but quicker path to Godric and his Great Rune. This option also spreads over to exploration across these major locations in general, as each of them have tons of pathways to explore for loot and progression. While some are more linear than others, they all offer several optional paths for exploration for goodies and shortcuts. Next we'll talk about item locations. Some items are locked behind bosses, which is understandable as you don't want everything to be available from spawn. However, several items are not locked behind bosses, which allows players to grab them early on to set up their resources and build as soon as possible. If you want the Antspur Rapier for that sweet rot effect, you just need to collect 2 keys from 2 castles, ride an elevator up, and run over to kill an NPC for it. Yeah, it's a trek, but nothing restrictive beyond go to place and kill person with item. In other words, there are few hard restrictions that restrict what we can get within reason, which aids in adding options for players during the first half of the game before progression requirements really come into effect. Next up are boss rewards. The remembrances each major boss gives can usually be split amongst 2 rewards, ranging from their weapons or spells and being used for runes. Then the remembrances can be duplicated at certain locations to obtain even more of the boss gear or runes. This can give the player access to unique and useful items or spells, like Renala's Full Moon, Malekith's Black Blade, Malenia's Scarlet Aeonia, and so on. Several of these items offer unique Ashes of War that involve a highly detailed move with unique pros and cons. The options come from the choice of which thing to purchase once the boss is defeated, as we use up the remembrance with each purchase. Granted, the duplication of remembrances helps alleviate this, but we still have to make a choice as to which abilities or gear we're going to acquire, or if we want to pop the remembrances for runes. The options are there, and each choice of item or runes remains useful on each playthrough or collection of a remembrance. Next we'll discuss the options in general upon starting a new game. We can play as the game guides us, or we can bounce around to whatever items we want to use, and whatever farming spots we'll need to refine our build before starting. A third option exists of mixing the two, where we progress normally for a time, until we shift gears for some sort of upgrade or item collection. In any case, the options for how to tackle this game vary widely by comparison to the previous games, as there's simply so much to do, get, and explore before we get to the main content with the Shardbearers and their respective boss locations. We have all the time and resources we need to get things set up in our favor, if we give it the time and have the knowledge we need. Next up is a returning point from the balancing section, where we have several spells that function within tiers of each other. Spells gradually expand in general as we go through the game, but several scale as we uncover stronger versions of said spell. The various glintstone projectiles play on this perfectly, with incredibly quick spells like Glintstone Pebble and the much more powerful but costly Comet. These spells function almost identically except for the costs, damage, and cast time. The pebbles are incredibly useful if we need quick little stabs at enemies. If we need something to bring the pain on a single target, we can charge up Comet and let rip. They also have several spells in between that help to add options based on stat level requirements, damage to cost ratio, and cast speed. Other spells have a similar scaling, such as Glintstone Stars leading into the more powerful and costly Star Shower, then even further on to Stars of Ruin. These all produce tracking stars to shoot at enemies, but the number and power of them goes up with each successive tier. This goes on for other spells as well, especially with incantations for healing, as we have several in the game that heal for greater and greater amounts, like Lord's Heal, or offer growing bonuses to slow health regen, like Blessing of the Erdtree. Another point we'll return to from the balancing section are the items that boost abilities and types of damage. This gives the player options for increasing the damage of certain damage types, certain spell types, or just increasing damage overall. This opens up builds that can go heavily into one aspect of their build for greater effect, like sorcerers who boost the charge speed and damage to maximum effect. This allows a certain overcharging of builds when we're given the option to stack all these items on top of each other to deal some crazy damage. As was also mentioned previously in the balancing section, Faith has a significant overlap in this game with several other build options, specifically those specializing in intelligence and arcane. This overlap leads to many players trying out different incantations and sorceries that they normally wouldn't given what traditional builds usually entail, but the added options give them more flexibility in combat. The final point we'll bring up regarding options is the expansion of status effect builds. We have Poison, Frost, Rot, Bleed, and Frenzy that can be layered on top of each other if you know what you're doing. The Antspur Rapier is a great example, as it initially has Scarlet Rot, but allows for an additional effect once we have the proper Ashes of War and a Wet Blade. We can stack Poison on top of it, or add Bleed for extra punch. It's not the only item we can do this with either, although it is rare to see the overstacking. Then we get different spells that apply various effects, like Frosted Lightning, and dragon spells that spew rot everywhere. These allow for status and magic to overlap in a way that creates a new type of build within the spellcaster realm when it comes to status effects, while also adding magic to status effect builds. This adds variety for both content available to each build type, and options for players in general. Now we come to number 2, content. We'll begin by looking at the crafting again, as we all know about the massive pile of items we can create. While not all of them are as useful as we'd like, the crafting still offers a large swath of varied weapons, consumables, and utilitarian items to aid us in our journey through the game. We can craft a dynamic range of throwing pots and knives, a range of miscellaneous boluses to save us from status effects, a series of consumables that boost our defenses, a series of resins that we can apply to our weapons, and unique items that help us heal, increase visibility, and aid in item or rune collection. The crafting in the game really shines because it allows us to craft items we want at our own pace, as most items in the crafting menu have materials that regenerate throughout the map. This means we don't have to rely on vendors to buy materials from, although that can help, and we can get what we need when we need it if we know where to get the materials. Take the gold fowlfoot recipe. All the materials we need for it can be farmed from the Weeping Peninsula in short order. That's not the only location either, but it's in the early game and is also just a great area to go for other resources as well. A related aspect is the idea of farming materials for crafting items. This varies in difficulty because of what materials drop from animals, enemies, or exist in the environment to take. Environmental takes are usually an easy walk up and loot it, while animals and enemies involve us chasing down the creature and killing it for its loot. Birds are notoriously difficult given they'll simply fly away, but that could be a balancing thing given that their materials are used for item and rune reward boosts. Next is customizing weapons and abilities. As we mentioned previously, the combinations and recombinations of the various weapons, ashes of war, and their infusions create a large range of options for various builds to use various weapons in various ways. This creates opportunities for a lot of variety given that we have 3 levels of customization for our weapon choices, and several of those customization options can be tweaked at will as we go through the game. This point is aided by another in that there are several ashes of war available early on from Bernal in his little hut, not to mention those we find consistently throughout the game's side areas. Another point in favor of the content is the number of ways to farm runes. Whether raiding all the grave sites for the collectible runes, or finding a Mega Dragon tail to swipe, we have options for varied amounts of runes across the entire map, as there are several grave sites in each zone with appropriately leveled rune items to loot. The farming spots also aren't too bad as we have several locations with enemies that give high rune value within a short amount of time if we know what we're doing. I've already mentioned the Mega Dragon tail farming method, but another simple one anyone can do involves the giants roaming around the northern section of Limgrave. Each of those bad boys gives 1,000 runes, and can go down pretty quickly when we play aggressively. Other areas have this as well, but the obvious highlights are Greyol's Tail, Falling Bird, and Albinauric farming in the endgame. Moving to unlockables, several NPCs exist in the game to give us access to new spells and abilities as we come across them. This ranges from the many merchants we find, or the named NPCs that give more specific spells and items. Most areas have an NPC or two that can unlock new spells and abilities, as well as give you quest lines that unlock even more content. They also serve as multiple unlock points when we find scrolls that unlock certain abilities. We have a few different people we can take these to and unlock these skills, with my favorite being Turtle Pope, but the options are there. Next up are the maps found throughout the game. These things give us a goal for exploration by signaling that we should absolutely go for them if we want a detailed map to navigate across the zone. Each map will unlock a large area of the zone, which leads to the discovery of more content when you begin to notice what each thing on the map represents, like mines, ruins, castles, etc. These give us a head start in navigating through the lanes between, and push us toward more exploration as we'll explore to find the map, then we'll explore the zone we now have details of. Next are the dungeons. These vary depending on where we are in the game, but all of these catacombs function as classic dungeon crawlers where we overcome the challenges and fight a boss to gain some unique item or spirit. What we get with a lot of these is slow exploration while avoiding traps, solving a puzzle, and eventually reaching and defeating the boss of the area. Once we're done, we move on to the next one and repeat. There are a large number of these, some of them with unique progression, like the one leading to Minimogue in the Three Fingers, and the one that leads us into the Frenzy Forest in the DLC. They each offer a unique layout and challenge while maintaining an Indiana Jones vibe of overcoming old ruin traps and navigation to get the gold. Next up are bosses that lead to changes in the world. This is a unique dynamic of the game, as certain boss defeats are required for various questlines and progression in general, because they affect the world in some way. Radon is the greatest example of this, as his defeat opens up one of the underground areas, which links to several other underground areas, some of which are required for a unique questline that adds an ending to the game. Now let's go back to a point I brought up earlier with items affecting stats. As stated before, this gives options for build variety and min-maxing, but we also get a staggering amount of items that do this. There are an abundance of talismans that affect stats in various ways, some with drawbacks, some not, and there are several items that offer similar effects with their own unique drawbacks or lack thereof. These items help to increase the overall variety in what we can do when we min-max our builds, and allows for a little bit of an edge when we get good enough to overcome their drawbacks. Let's go back to another point about unique items having unique effects. Some of our craftables can create interesting encounters when we can lure certain enemies away from each other, or can turn them into an ally for a limited time. That creates more dynamics in combat, and more options for overcoming challenges in general. This also extends to some of the unique items we use to unlock things. Take the Dragon Hearts for example. They are unlocked in a unique way, and lead to unique spells we can obtain at unique locations. This all feeds into the variety of places to go to, which we'll touch on later. Another unique item we can get early on is the HP Regen Talisman. We go through a transporter chest, then walk up and open another chest and boom, free HP Regen Talisman. While this isn't as balanced as finding these items was in some of the other games, giving players the option to obtain it early helps to mitigate all the new threats and challenges to overcome while exploring the world. This also touches on transporter chests and portals in general, leading to areas with good loot, or new areas to explore, which further drives the player through the content of the game. Another good item we can get early is the Turtle Shield, which increases stamina regen. It's also found in the Weeping Peninsula in a tower near a spirit spring, making getting it quite simple. This does make me wonder if the devs intentionally put all this good gear in the peninsula area, or if they simply had all these ideas and made the peninsula first, so they stuffed it with early game goodies that could be useful throughout the run. Either way, the peninsula has a ton of helpful materials in it for any build to take advantage of. Speaking of dealing with new challenges, the summons offer a variety of options for players who could use a hand in different ways. For instance, we can balance our build with a summon of a different type, essentially covering for us given our build's weaknesses. Or we can overclock our build with another summon like us to become an ultra duo of whatever build we happen to be running with. Or we can pick a summon that's got some unique thing they do that can help us deal with the challenges we see. Black Knife Taish is one of the best in this regard given her high mobility, including the ability to dodge, and Destined Death move. Then we have the Mimic tier, which copies the build the player has at the time of summoning. This opens the possibilities for 2-player level threats to go against the boss, but it also runs into issues, as the AI may use our build setup inefficiently. Another side of the Mimic tier is setting up the Mimic tier with certain gear and then quickly switching to a different set so we can cover different aspects of a fight. Switching quickly is the biggest drawback with this, but it still acts as a unique way to play the game when we customize our Mimic in such a way. There are also various other summons that serve as different builds in and of themselves. We have summons of all types: tank, glass cannon, dexterity, sniper, status effect, sorcery, incantation, and niche ones as well. All of these options add to the content of the game, as well as our options when using them. Going over more aspects of the combat content, we have several unique spells that offer unique effects. Famous ones include Comet Azure being a laser beam, and the various moon spells where we cast moons that absorb spells and explode or serve as a repeat AoE on the ground. There are many others as well, with Loretta's sniping spells being very effective at long range, and the night spells being difficult for enemies to dodge. We also have all the offshoots of incantations, whether through the dragon moves, lightning sweeps, typical and atypical pyromancy, or the holy moves we can use for offense, defense, or support. This wide variety with unique effects helps to expand on build ideas from previous games with these types of builds and content in general. Another aspect of the content that should be mentioned is how a dedicated jump button changes things. This allows for more effective parkour challenges and traversal to areas we'd have a hard time getting to in some of the older games. This lets the levels spread out in a more even split between horizontal and vertical areas to traverse, leading to more intricate level design and exploration. The jump also adds an extra layer to combat, as jump attacks are far easier to manage with a dedicated button for jumping. To expand on this point further, we now have Torrent to help us in exploring the world. This includes his speed boost and double jump that helps traversal across wide gaps and to climb higher objects. This essentially expands on everything that would come with a regular jump button, as we now have levels crafted with player platforming involved, as well as levels crafted with Torrent platforming involved as well, adding on to the overall platforming functionality in the game. One aspect that is not unique to this game is the reusing of animations for new enemies. The Erdtree avatars are uniquely memorable, as their movesets mirror a lot of attacks from the Asylum demons and their upgraded counterparts in Dark Souls 1. While the moveset is largely similar, the developers spiced up the moveset with additional inputs and layering on new attacks to the old ones. This is a very efficient way to create new enemies out of old work, which saves time and resources that can go to new ideas that need the extra work. Several other enemies have animations recycled from previous games, which again saves time for the developers and allows players to pick up on familiar movesets, even if they've been tweaked in different ways. Another unique way to unlock things is through the towers found throughout the game that require some puzzle to be solved. Some of them involve using a spirit spring to leap into the tower from a certain angle. They may have an invisible bridge leading into it. We may need to find a few hidden turtles, or we may need to get some imps to smack each other. In any case, these towers act as micro-dungeons given their short puzzle solving, leading to rewards within. Another point that we went over earlier was the level exploration and how Site of Grace teleporting aided in traversing the world. This is especially poignant in the content section, as warping allows us to explore at will without having to traverse from point A to B on foot, or hoof rather. This helps in exploration and traversal through areas we've already reached and improves exploration and traversal as we explore new areas. This keeps the content fresh and convenient when we're ready to explore a new area, or bounce back and forth between different paths we're exploring. Another point that plays off level exploration is how those areas change depending on what time of day it is. At night, several enemies come out to play, namely the Night Knights and Bell-Bearing Hunters. These unique enemies offer unique rewards and serve as unique bosses when we learn where and when we can fight them. These bosses breathe dynamicism into the day-night cycle, as things will change depending on where we're at, and if there's a unique boss only available at night. One point that should be obvious is the sheer amount of stuff in the game. We have over 300 weapons available, over 100 Ashes of War, over 80 Spirit Summons, over 180 craftable items, 12 infusion options, over 200 bosses, over 300 locations, over 50 unique boss weapons and spells, and roughly 17 zones to go through depending on how you define it. In short, there's a ton of content in this game by comparison to the previous games and in general. Whether we love or hate the game, it's clear they tried cramming as much content in as possible. This helps to alleviate players' concerns when we pay full price for a game and experience all its content in 5 hours. Elden Ring doesn't have this problem, as many will take upwards of 140 hours to go through the game and DLC. There's just so much there to go through, and the developers have to be given props for trying to give the players as much to do and use as possible. Now we come to the greatest aspect of Elden Ring's content, the map itself. This map is massive compared to the levels From created before, offering in excess of over 300 locations to visit, as previously mentioned, which is more than double the areas from all the other previous games in this Souls style combined. Granted, many of these areas are simple ruins, dungeons, or towers that aren't as deep as the typical level from previous games, but that is counterbalanced by some of the larger levels that we explore. The notable areas of the game have been dubbed Legacy Dungeons, largely because they're basically a level built in a similar way to previous From levels. These and other levels like them include Stormvale Castle, Raya Lucaria, Lanedale, Volcano Manor, Castle Redmane, Farum Azula in general, my personal favorite, the Haligtree, Castle Ensis, Shadow Keep, and Anir Illim. These areas usually hold many alternate paths through them for goodies and traversal, while eventually leading to the main boss of each area. They are all notably large in scope and in content within themselves, essentially acting as From's typical level design. The difference between these large areas from this game and the others in prior games is that we have an entire world built around them in Elden Ring. We have the whole of Liurnia around Raya Lucaria. We have Stormvale Castle overlooking Limgrave. The Haligtree caps off the consecrated snowfield. Shadow Keep serves as a massive structure leading to multiple pathways for different major bosses and progression, while also being a central location in the DLC. And Anir Illim serves as the culmination of the DLC, as we slowly climb into the clouded city overlooking the Land of Shadow. These areas are great in and of themselves, but what's around them makes the world feel and function even larger and more real. The dynamic of going through several caves, ruins, forts, towers, and dungeons is juxtaposed against these massive castles and structures that house the main bosses of the area and serve as the cherry on top of the zones themselves. As stated previously, these areas are fantastic levels on top of an already massive and interconnected world to explore. My favorite level, being the Haligtree, largely deals with how unique of a structure it is by comparison to the others. They are also well made, but often follow a castle structure with different pathways and mechanisms for traversing them. Some have more unique aesthetics like Volcano Manor being in a volcano, or Farum Azula and Anir Illim floating in the sky. The Haligtree is largely different in this regard, as we slowly make our way from the tips of branches of a great tree, through the settlement within the branches, down through the castle structures around the trunk, then through winding roots down to a church to the base, then we cap off with the boss at the roots of the great tree itself. It's a unique level from start to finish that blends many elements of level design together, such as working around nature, creating structures around abnormal environments, and slowly building up the levels in a logical and aesthetic way that blends with the boss as we get closer to Malenia herself. While the praise of the Legacy Dungeons is warranted, the world itself should also get its dues. The overworld and underground areas are breathtaking to experience for various reasons, either for their beauty, carnage, or pure scale. Rolling green plains and forests across Limgrave, a large lake surrounding the Academy in Liurnia, a craggy mountain surrounding a volcano in Mount Gelmir, the blighted death and fungi around Caelid, the frozen wastes of the consecrated snowfield, and the giant corpses frozen in mountaintops of the giants, the ashes of Lanedale in the wake of change, the bioluminescence across the Cerulean coast, the bloodbath as we climb the dragon corpse-ridden jagged peak, the alien finger ruins across the DLC in general, and so much more. These spectacles play on the larger levels, but also help to establish the scale of what the player interacts with. We begin in several places and go deeper or higher depending on where the main area or boss is. We basically scale up as we go, but we need more smaller and simpler areas to accentuate the larger and more complex areas. The lows help define the highs, as it were. The smaller areas also help lead into the other major areas with specific resources that give access to them. The medallions all function this way, with the medallions in Limgrave and Caelid leading to Alta's Plateau, and the medallions in Liurnia and Mountaintop of the Giants leading to the consecrated snowfield. We also get this in portals and transport coffins in the underground areas that lead us through different areas as well. It's the constant drip of there being more that helps encourage exploration through these smaller areas as we amass resources and knowledge before hitting the legacy dungeon of each zone, and then moving on to the next zone to repeat the process. This game plays on the old dynamic of Dark Souls 1's level, where if you could see it, you might be able to reach it. This game does that in spades, as most of the areas you can see, you can go to them and beyond. While we can't go literally everywhere, we can go through all these massive areas with tons of side areas to explore for various types of content, and we cap off each area with a legacy dungeon or massive structure leading to a major boss for the finale. The gameplay loop for exploration of explore, scale up, repeat works incredibly well here, given the sheer amount of places we can cycle through, and how each of them add on to each other given new abilities, summons, levels, gear, and so on. In short, the content of the game's levels snowballs resources for us as we progress until we reach the end and have tons of rewards to boot. The content of the game, particularly the level design, is something I think this game does exceptionally well. From set out to make their version of a truly open world, and they succeeded in that department on top of simply adding more options to the pile given the number of weapons, summons, ashes of war, craftables, and areas to explore. There's so much to do and redo in the game, whether you're a veteran or new to this developer, and that makes the game well worth the price from a content per dollar value, which is ultimately what we want from a game when it comes to its content. We want the content to be entertaining and deep, and this game does it very well. Now we get to the number one positive aspect of Elden Ring, the difficulty. We'll begin the list of positive difficulty related things with the statues of Marika. They act as pseudo checkpoints where we can respawn closer to boss fog doors and other areas in general. These serve as a handy skip to avoid running back through enemies and let us get right back into the fight. A neat detail is they are also optional, so if we want to respawn closer or restart the challenge of getting back to the checkpoint, we have a choice. Another small aspect of the difficulty that plays well is the way the map is unlocked. The map only gives a little blip to find the real map for a given area, and the various challenges of finding it becomes half the fun of exploration. Next up are the ways traps can be helpful. There are many traps in the game that act as a challenge to overcome at first, and then a tool to be manipulated later. These can be found in traps that are re-triggerable, via stepping on something, smacking something, or leading enemies into the auto pane. They can be very helpful for counteracting the suffering in the game. We'll get to that later. Next is telegraphing. There are several encounters where unique attacks come with unique wind-ups, creating a sense of tension during them that remains fair and balanced given the movesets in question. One particular example that has become iconic and a bit of a meme is Radahn's meteor fall. Having him disappear into the sky to come crashing down in a fiery ball for Phase 2 is one of those over-the-top moments that absolutely works for the fight and looks fantastic. A few others that are notable include Placidusac's lightning AoE, Melania's Scarlet Aeonia, Morgoth's Splooshing, Radagon's Triple Hammer, Elden Beast's Ringed AoE, Bale's Flight of Destruction, and Symphodon's Golden Shower. All of these moves offer a fantastic visual that also illustrates what the boss is about to do and follows through with it in a fair manner. Now we'll piggyback on the points made in favor of the physic as it relates to difficulty. The options it provides allows players to dictate the difficulty of encounters in different ways, whether that be through additional healing, increased protection, damage boosts, or utility improvements. The physic adds an extra dimension to help us overcome the challenges in different ways, depending on our preferences. Our next point is the way status pools are included and balanced in the game. In previous games, status pools and lakes of poison were often a blight on players, no pun intended, and often caused frustration and dread upon entering an area with excess amounts of health drain via goo. In Elden Ring, this has been rebalanced given the advent of crafting materials and the ability to craft recovery boluses largely at will. This means dealing with status pools often comes down to a player's knowledge and resource management. Next up is the inclusion of several locations where we can grab runes to save for later. These graveyards and other locations spread bankable runes all over the maps of the game. This helps with leveling as well as maintaining something of a bag of cash when we run into a vendor and want to buy something. It also helps whenever we need to pay for something in general, like upgrading weapons. These little pockets of cash help keep the game progression up, while including even more reasons for exploration as we begin to recognize where rune dumps will be once we spot the pattern. Now we'll move to a benefit found in the early game, the HP Talisman. Finding and grabbing this item is incredibly easy, and helps to alleviate the woes of many players after getting ambushed by the Tree Sentinel and others up to this point. It can be found incredibly early on, and requires a short ride and walk to get on subsequent runs. It's incredibly helpful in the early game and in general, so putting it on up front helps players get back into exploring and fighting, as we now have something to help us get a little farther than we could on our own. Now we come to items increasing stats at the cost of something else, which we've mentioned several times before. This balancing helps to avoid overclocking players from the outset who know where stuff is, as well as giving all of us a choice. Take that bonus for the price of extra damage taken, or reduced flask potency. The choice is there, and it also leads to some funny things when left to crazy players who want to try the paper cut challenge to see how far they can get with items that reduce their defenses in different ways. Next is how Torrent helps us to mitigate some challenges posed by parkour and mounted movement in general. His speed and double jump help us to overcome various elevation challenges, as well as deal with a wide range of enemy attacks while mounted. A particular favorite of mine is when we accidentally fall off a ledge and manage to double jump recovery ourselves. Beats falling and breaking our legs. Or his. Now come the boss rewards. Many of the bosses in the game give fantastic weapons and abilities that make their defeat well worth it. It's no secret that I'm particularly fond of Malekith's Black Blade, but Scarlet Aeonia, Renala's Full Moon, Blasphemous Blade, Placidusax's Ruin, Marika's Hammer, Sacred Relic Sword, Rellana's Twin Moons, the Starscourge's Greatsword, and its boosted brothers all have their fair share of usefulness. Several boss rewards vary in function and purpose while maintaining unique effects that help add variety and options for players that want some more unique ways to play with than one of their own crazy creations. Speaking of weapons, another aspect of the difficulty comes back to the variety of options available when customizing weapons. The mixing and matching of various ashes of war and how the weapons are infused helps to create a wide range of combinations to help players overcome different challenges at different times. Fighting a plant-based enemy? Add fire. Need status effects to chunk down that huge HP bar? Throw bleed or frost on there. Want to be loathed by everyone? Layer on rot and poison onto the same weapon. Want the enemy to feel the power of your intelligence? Crank up the magic damage. This also helps with build optimization, as respeccing weapons allows us to push a weapon's scaling into our favor when we make its effects more in line with our stat choices. The options are fantastic, and help to alleviate some of the difficulty of the game through quick changes in resources. Next is something that I will definitely get some pushback on, the chariots. Many of their sequences offer a unique challenge focused on traversal as opposed to open combat, along with navigation and quick thinking being the skills that are tested when dealing with the mechanical menaces. I know they can be overly punishing in the beginning, but their telegraphing couldn't get any more fair after making a bunch of noise and making their rounds over and over again. Another aspect is the way enemy movesets expand as the game progresses. We get enemies with fairly average combos and moves that gradually become more expansive in different ways depending on who they are and where they are. A great example of this is the average soldier we see in the game. The variations between those found in Limgrave, Liurnia, Caelid, Altus Plateau, and so on each have their own spin on the basic soldier enemy design, usually focusing on a gimmick of their respective area. For example, the soldiers in Liurnia have a chance to use glintstone rocks that shoot spells at us, and soldiers around the Halleck Tree use special miracles when fighting us. Other enemies do this as well, where we have variants across the world that have differing weapons, movesets, and interactions available. My favorite is the slow escalation of the Diaper Dudes. We have Little Diaper Dude, then Fat Diaper Dude, then Mega Diaper Daddy. All hail the mighty Diaper. But seriously, there are a lot of variants as the game goes on between the different regular enemies, mini-bosses, and minor bosses throughout the game that add new elements on top of old assets, keeping the difficulty up by expanding on old movesets with new twists and turns. Next are boss gimmicks that actually work. Radahn immediately comes to mind as he is the most realized and fair boss gimmick in the game. We can fight him during the Radahn Festival with the addition of our summon army, as per his gimmick, or we can solo him to prove ourselves worthy of shifting the stars. Either way, his gimmick works, and he remains a fair fight whether we engage with the gimmick or not. Another example of a fair gimmick done well is Renala's first phase, where we smack her sweetings around to pop her bubble. Their indications are clear, damage is balanced accordingly, and we have plenty of time to get around to the little ones before we smack up their mama. Another minor gimmick fight would be when we face Mimic Tears. They put a mirror in front of us and help us find holes in our build and cause us to rethink our strategies. Or we go naked and then pound them into the dust when they copy the weak version of ourselves. Either way, the gimmick for these fights work as well. Next is skipping content through alternate paths. This relates to difficulty in that we have multiple options to get places, some being much easier than others, but the options make way for the difficulty discussion. Take getting to Altus Plateau, for example. We can grab the two medallion halves, with one being in the notoriously more difficult zone of Caelid, or we can go through the ruin-strewn precipice, which is scaled appropriately compared to Caelid. Yes, Caelid may be simpler in terms of accessing Altus, but each path has a pro and a con. The medallion route requires two medallions, with one being in an area that can easily get us killed, in a zone that can easily get us killed. But it's still faster. It's that risk versus reward system we always talk about. On the other side, going through the precipice is much easier than traversing through Caelid in some ways, but it also requires us to beat the dungeon in order to progress. This can take longer than running into Caelid for the medallion. We're dealing with lower level enemies than in Caelid, but we have to find victory in the dungeon before we get our reward. Again, it's a risk versus reward system where we take the longer and less challenging path, or we take on the greater threat to reach our goal sooner. This follows for other alternate pathways to different areas as well, like gaining entry to Lanedale. We can go down a quest chain or face the Draconic Tree Sentinel guarding the way in. Either way, we need to get in, and the options are split between two paths of varying challenge. Now we'll be doubling back to the points made in favor of spell balancing. Since many of the various sorceries and incantations are balanced accordingly, this means many of the pros and cons of each of them are also balanced accordingly, at least for the most part. There are always outliers of incredibly good spells and incredibly terrible ones. But overall, the various spells work well within their respective types and remain largely balanced across their various functions when it comes to offense, defense, utility, cost, and where we find them. Spinning off spells, we also have how they help to counteract the negatives in the game. A prime example is how annoying rot and other toxins can be. A quick application of an incantation, such as Flame Cleanse Me, can wipe that gunk off in no time with a cheap spell cast. Other options include the range of abilities that can help, with a few spells being found along the main path that are fantastic additions to any arsenal, especially incantation characters when we get some mega heals near the endgame. The spells help to counteract other problems we'll get into later, such as several enemies attacking at once, sudden ambushes, and punishing gauntlets. Sniping enemies also helps to avoid problems when fighting them, as several enemies have significant issues in the places they exist. Having several ranged options for attacking, as well as recovery abilities, helps to alleviate a lot of pain that comes from attrition, ganking, or other specific issues like flying enemies that give our cameras epilepsy. We'll get to that in due time, just you wait. One of the biggest difficulty shifts was giving players a HP regen talisman early in the base game, but no FP regen item. This may seem unfair at first, but this helps with balancing as HP regen is affected by combat in general, as well as traversal, while FP is more niche and is less likely to be the stat to worry about during most situations in the game. This regen of HP helps to keep players alive without giving them something that regens FP for crazy attacks. In other words, we're given a defensive option instead of an offensive one. Imagine how OP we could become if we had FP regen early on. Think of how crazy spell builds would be when they could spam an enemy from afar with magic, run away, wait to regen, and then carry on without any limitations. This is where the DLC comes in handy by bringing a FP regen item into the mix. It's found early in the DLC and can be a massive boon to anyone, either in the base game or DLC. The catch is that we have to defeat Mohg in order to reach the DLC, so this incredibly helpful item is locked behind one of the endgame fights. This is similar to the Dark Souls 3 Sun Princess ring being locked behind Aldrich. Both items are placed at a stage of the game where having the item won't make us overpowered or radically change the balancing of the game. They're placed where they can be useful, but not so useful to cause balancing issues. Next we'll discuss Faith. Faith and all it unlocks. Faith in Elden Ring leads to many things. Incantations mostly, but what's included in that category varies quite a bit. We have Pyromancy, Lightning, Holy, and it overlaps with some sorceries and arcane abilities like dragon spells. To say Faith got a buff would be an understatement. So much is tied to Faith this time around that we can make several varied combos of Faith-based builds across the various elemental types associated with it. It's crazy how many incantations there are, and how wildly different they can be across the 120 incantations available after the DLC. Now we get to glass cannon builds being even more cannon-y than before, with some insane tough poise breakers possible given the amount of large weapons and heavy attacks now available thanks to jump attacks being easier to perform, extra boost to strength stats, and the extra poise damage from physic pops. After all that and dual wielding, smacking the teeth out of enemies becomes an absolute joy to do, assuming we have the stamina to maintain it. Since this build hits the hardest, it also has the heaviest requirements, as we need enough stats to wield each colossal weapon in one hand, we need enough equip load to maintain a decent roll, and we need to have enough stamina to perform the crushing attacks that we get when dual wielding. Lots of requirements that require a lot of stat investment, but it is so worth it when you get that hit in. The last point we'll discuss regarding the positives of difficulty comes from the way Arcane has been implemented this time around. Arcane intermingles between different status effects and incantations that open up mixtures of the two. This leads to interesting combinations of status effect weapons and incantations that do something similar. As I've mentioned before, weapons that apply bleed, frost, poison, rot, and frenzy combine well with incantations and spells that do something similar. A few sorceries and incantations apply frostbite, so pairing those with something like the frozen needle helps to proc it as often as possible. Likewise for bleed, corpse piler or any other bleed weapon combos incredibly well with any of the blood chucking incantations that Moog is a fan of. Then we have the slower status effects like poison and rot that can also be comboed with various incantations that apply similar effects. Same thing goes for frenzy. All this is on top of the options to mix and match, making arcane builds one of the most versatile in terms of the overlap with other stats, as well as status effects being overpowered in most situations anyway. Not my personal favorite build, but applying a bleed or frost proc to a colossal weapon is always a good time, at least when you're the one swinging. But with that, we've covered several of the positive aspects of Elden Ring. Let me know your additions to the list in the comments, as I'm sure it'll start a firestorm of people arguing over what's good and not so good in the game. I look forward to reading it. Now we'll shift gears toward the negative, and you may notice several patterns as we go through this side of the list. We're starting off with negative number 5, balancing. This will be short, as there are only a few things that I plan to talk about in this section that don't overlap with things we'll discuss later. For now, let's talk about Spirit Ashes, how they work, and how we upgrade them. We all know how they work. Get Summoning Bell, pick ashes up from wherever, find the weeds that improve them, and pay Roderica to upgrade them. It's pretty cut and dry, but the problem is with Roderica herself and how we use the ashes. First, let's talk about the girl. She will not upgrade Spirit Ashes unless we get her to the Round Table Hold and talk to her and Hugh a few times over. This means we have a few requirements that must be completed beforehand. To get her to the Round Table Hold, we need to progress her questline, which means going to the cliff facing Grace in Liurnia, as that teleports her to the table. Once she's there, we need to speak to Hugh, then to her, then to Hugh again, then reload the area, and we can upgrade our Spirit Ashes. If you haven't already caught on to the issues with this as far as balancing goes, let's start with her placement in general and the restrictions that holds. She will not move to the Round Table Hold until we make it to Liurnia, which means going through Stormvale Castle and defeating Godric if we follow the Path of Grace. If we already know the workaround, then we can run around the castle to get to Liurnia to skip this. Then we have to talk to her and a new NPC a few times and reload before we get a proper Spirit Ash upgrader. Both unlock paths are entirely dependent on player knowledge of how it works, as opposed to being available from the start or simply requiring us to make it to the table. If we follow the game's guidance through the Grace pathway, we have to defeat a major boss before we can upgrade our summons. This also doesn't factor in that we require an item to summon in the first place, which is easily missed if we don't encounter Ranni at the Church of Ella before this. Then we need to work around a NPC questline to upgrade our summons after a series of obtuse requirements are met. The reason this is a balancing problem is that we are given several areas where we can summon, along with summons and their upgrade materials to collect in Limgrave, but we can't summon and upgrade them unless we do specific things with specific people in specific locations at specific times. Take note of how convoluted it can become based on natural play. If you want to use summons after learning about them from the first summon area with the Tree Sentinel boss, you'll be hard-pressed to use them if you miss Ranni appearing in an area you already went to at a particular time of night after talking to Melina and getting Torrent earlier. Then you have to make it to the Round Table Hold by reaching a site of grace outside of Limgrave to buy an item to summon. Naturally, you'll follow the guidance of grace if you don't start wandering around the main area on its own. The natural path will lead you to Stormvale, as it's the most obvious path to go down, which requires clearing of Margit and Godric before reaching the Cliffside Grace that will unlock the Round Table Hold, and in turn, Roderica and her ability to upgrade summons after talking to her and Hugh several times. If you do meet Ranni, then you can summon some wolves, but can't upgrade them until we progress through Limgrave's major location and defeat a Shardbearer, which can be varied in terms of difficulty depending on how much content in Limgrave you go through before tackling Margit and Stormvale Castle in general. This is all based on what is most likely to happen during a first playthrough, wherein lies part of the issue. There is a high chance of missing summoning altogether until you get out of Limgrave and make it to the Round Table Hold. From there, you also have to buy a specific item in order to summon, which requires knowledge of the vendors at the table and what item you need. Now, several of these interactions can come naturally when we reach the table, as we'll want to explore and talk to NPCs. That's not the problem. It's that so many things are locked behind NPC discussions that can be missed in different ways depending on player choice that can't be held against them. In other words, we have to know about Ranni if we want summons early in Limgrave. We have to know about Roderica's questline functionality to upgrade them. And we need to know to get Roderica to the Round Table Hold and set her up so we can actually upgrade them. It's convoluted for no reason. It also creates issues when some players will randomly come across Ranni and gain summon functionality for Limgrave. Having summons this early gives players a massive advantage given how weak they are by this point in the game, but is easily missed if you do what you want to do, explore. This is the main point of my argument, just to be clear. The convolution of requirements for obtaining and upgrading summons causes issues unless you know about very specific things. Once you do know these things, it becomes a straight shot to skip things to get to the table early and unlock summons and upgrades for them. If you don't know these things, you'll have to go through the convoluted mess to upgrade them and even find what you need to use them in the first place if you missed Ranni. This system is a waste of time and is entirely left up to chance for beginners. Even when we know what to do, we still have to jump through a few hoops to get this to work. When we know what we're doing, we'll immediately spawn in and rest at every site of grace along the path to the Church of Ella and up towards Stormvale Castle. As soon as we meet Melina and get Torrent, either we'll return to Ella and reload to night to get the summoning bell from Ranni and the wolves, or we'll skirt around Stormvale to get Roderica to the Round Table and set her up for Spirit Ash upgrading along with picking up the summoning bell if we missed it. Then we'll start progressing the game. If we want this early on, which seems like something most players would want, we'll do it the same way almost every time. Even with minor variations based on getting our build set up, this line of progression will largely stay the same. When we don't know what to do, it's a convoluted mess that can leave us limited in summon strength or functionality based purely off chance. When we do know what to do, it's a railroad of boredom as we talk to NPCs over and over to set up summons and an upgrade system for them. Either way, it's a joke. Now, we don't need summons to beat the game, but when we're given so many early game opportunities to summon and yet can completely miss what it takes to unlock and upgrade them, there's a problem. Then we have the tedious elements of setting them up when we know what to do. That is also a problem. Another balancing problem is the way rune rewards are spread out. Sometimes we'll get massive amounts of runes from a particular area, while we'll go through an entire dungeon and gain a smidgen of runes from the boss we kill. This imbalance leads many to skip dungeons entirely unless we want something inside, like particular resources. Even then, that also compounds with other problems we'll discuss later. Now let's briefly mention another major balancing problem that will overlap with several points later: extreme difficulty. This comes in waves, which we'll discuss later, but there is a significant balancing issue in that several encounters simply do too much damage or utterly overwhelm the player with a particular gimmick. Again, we'll go through this in more detail later, so I won't spoil anything for now. Just keep this in mind as we move on. Now we'll get to negative number 4, quality of life. We'll begin by recapping much of what I said regarding the summoning system and unlocking them. It's just a mess when we don't know what to do, and it's tedious and boring when we do know what to do. All my thoughts on that are in the previous section, but it warranted being brought up here as well. Now let's get to something Elden Ring is full of: temporary restrictions for no reason. This is displayed early on with the Church of Ella's anvil only allowing upgrades a few times before we have to reach Hugh and the Round Table hold for more. This is just a stupid restriction, full stop. If we can upgrade our weapons here, just let us continue doing it if we have the resources. We'll have to move on and reach the Round Table anyway, which includes far more mechanical usefulness per the options available at its forge and area in general. Restricting this is a confusing decision since it won't matter in the grand scheme of things, given how useful the Round Table option becomes when unlocked by comparison to this. It's very much a nitpick, but it's still a stupid restriction. Another example of Elden Ring arbitrarily restricting you is the Grace teleporting lock when in dungeons. The only thing this affects is teleportation within the dungeon to a site of grace, whether outside the dungeon or the one at the start. When leaving an incomplete dungeon for whatever reason, we have to waste time running outside so we can teleport to other locations. Regarding the dungeon itself, this only affects the run back to a site of grace, either after unlocking the boss of the area, or just because we want to replenish resources. What's worse is that every one of these locations we visit becomes locked off once inside, and then doesn't once we beat the dungeon boss. The biggest problem with this restriction is that it is entirely unnecessary for the majority of dungeons in this game. The exceptions might be puzzle dungeons that require teleporting chests to get around, or something that affects the area when the main challenge is navigating it rather than killing everything in it. That's up for debate, but for all the other dungeons, it just means we have to run back to the site of grace to rest. We have to run out to leave entirely, or we have to defeat the dungeon boss to unlock warping. None of these options need to work this way. If we want to run back to the site of grace to rest and recuperate, we can backtrack our steps where we've probably already killed the enemies around or run past them. In this case, locking warping just means we go back through areas we already dealt with in one way or another. The issue here is that we're simply retreading content that we'll deal with again after resting anyway. Changing the options to reach the site of grace at the start doesn't affect it beyond overcoming challenges we already overcame to get where we are in the dungeon by the time we choose to turn back. And then we'll go back through these same challenges again, like we did before when the area is reloaded. Allowing grace warping in a dungeon helps us to circumvent this extra walk back by simply restarting the level faster after we've already dealt with some of its challenges. Granted, some dungeons don't allow walkbacks as part of their challenge, but that's where I'd still say that warping from the get-go would be superior as well. It sucks if we don't think we'll make it and our only option is to kill ourselves, which leads to a reset of the area. With warping, we get the reset anyway, without the added pain of trying to recover our runes that we lost because the game just wants us to have a chance at losing them. This also feeds a point about all the other non-dungeon areas not having this restriction of grace warp back. Why is that fair for the larger areas, but not for these smaller ones? It's not only a waste of time in these smaller areas, it's also inconsistent. Now let's go over the next point of running out of a dungeon to leave it entirely. This restriction is the most obnoxious one, as we should be able to warp out of a dungeon when we're at the grace at the beginning at the bare minimum. This is just a tedious delay of time while we hop up some rocks, run back along a path, or take an elevator back to the surface. Sometimes it's a combination of those things depending on how deep we get into the dungeon. It's just a time waster, plain and simple. Allowing grace warping would help circumvent this in a similar manner to the previous point, where we don't have to retread old ground, and we can travel immediately. It cuts out the dead space of running, jumping, or riding out to an area where we can warp away. And this point also layers on top of retreating for resources. If we made it far enough into a dungeon, we've overcome the challenges it has in one way or another, so allowing warping when we want to leave will help us circumvent retreading challenges we already overcame, and would allow us to quickly leave and return to the dungeon. Again, it just wastes time with the restriction. Now to the final point of defeating the dungeon boss to unlock warping. Many dungeons feature the door to the boss being located near the beginning rather than the end. Not always, but it happens often. This requires players to fight through the dungeon to reach the mechanism to unlock the door. Then we backtrack to the door to enter it for the boss fight, usually requiring a walk back through areas we already cleared or overcame. Are you noticing a pattern yet? Warping freely from the beginning lets us circumvent this walk back to the boss door if it is located near the beginning. It saves us time and helps us get to the boss sooner in most cases. Now, as far as warping availability for dungeon bosses found deeper or at the end of the dungeons, I think these situations overlap with the first point once again. If I can warp back to restore resources when I want to stop, then I should be able to warp back in general even if I'm outside the boss fog wall. Again, it all comes back to being an arbitrary extension of time that is easily worked around by allowing warping from the beginning. Overall, the warping restrictions for dungeons just seem like a let's make it hard lol moment from the developers. It makes no sense compared to the massive areas we can freely warp into and out of. It's inconsistent and just wastes players' time. Speaking of wasting players' time, we've got another nitpick in how long it takes to get Melina to level us up. We have to rest at 5 sites of grace before she'll speak to us, even though we meet her just before our first one. Again, this is an arbitrary extension of playtime just for gits and shiggles. Melina needs to open that other eye so she can help us sooner. The same thing goes for the Roundtable Hold opening up when we rest at a site of grace outside of Limgrave. Arbitrary restriction because playtime need be big, make a game good. Another nitpick for the Roundtable is how upgrading weapons becomes extremely tedious when we have to warp over there, go through a loading screen, upgrade our stuff, and then figure out where we left off before going through another loading screen to return to where we were before. As I've mentioned several times throughout various videos and streams, every game after Dark Souls 1 has radically declined in the usefulness and versatility of checkpoints. All the other games have had varied levels of annoyance when it comes to the relentless warping necessary for integral parts of upgrades. Some games did it better than others, with Sekiro and Elden Ring making improvements from predecessors, while Dark Souls 2, 3, and especially Bloodborne all failed in this regard. Elden Ring did a lot regarding what grace can do, but it still failed to give everything we needed on our journey through the lanes between, especially given that some weapons can be upgraded 25 times. Imagine going through 50 loading screens to get your weapon upgraded as soon as possible. It's a joke, and I have no idea why From never seems to go back to what made the Dark Souls 1 bonfires so useful and unique. Another minor nitpick is that status ailments go through shields no matter what. That is something I have complained about for years across multiple games, and it makes no sense why bleed should build up when I'm not taking any physical damage whatsoever. Same thing with all the other status ailments. If I'm taking 0% damage from the weapon, then I shouldn't be taking status buildup either. As I'm sure you picked up on during this section, a large number of these problems are simple inefficiencies that could have been fixed with a minor tweak. Sadly, the devs either don't care, or just want to make things annoying to deal with. It's a real shame to see them falter on so many things in these games that seem like no-brainer fixes. I'm a noob with a computer. They're a multi-million-dollar company with a plethora of successful games over the last several years. Let's just say I've lost hope that they'll change, at least for the better. Now we'll get into negative number 3, options. We'll begin by going over one of the greatest lack of options in the game, FP regeneration. We are extremely limited in the resources available that regen FP by comparison to HP, disregarding flasks and the physic of course. With HP, we can go through a teleporter chest in the Weeping Peninsula and find a talisman that regenerates HP without any real challenge besides not dying along the way from A to B. By comparison, if we want the FP regen talisman, we'll need to make it to Mohg's Palace, an endgame area, kill Mohg, an endgame boss, access the DLC, and find the talisman in a ruin. That's already a massive uptick in terms of what we need to do to get this FP regen talisman when compared to the HP one. Let's look at crafting next. We can craft a Warming Stone or its frenzied counterpart, which regenerates HP for anything near it when it is dropped on the ground. The frenzied one adds frenzy buildup if not a part of the frenzied flame faction, but the regen is what matters. We can craft both, and they require a little FP to use each time, yielding a large return on investment when comparing FP lost to HP gained. By comparison, we have lulling branches which are found in the DLC. See requirements to get there listed previously. Then we have to deal with sleep buildup while regenerating FP. Another massive uptick in what is required to access this item along with its drawback of applying sleep. Now let's get to gear. There are several items that restore both HP and FP in different ways, either through critical hits or defeating enemies, but HP has a noticeably higher number along with a shield and armor set that regenerates HP as well as a myriad of spells and Ashes of War that do the same. Now, lots of those things require FP to be used in order to gain HP, and HP is mandatory for progression since we'll die once that hits 0. But that stark contrast in options available occurs because of the ease of HP recovery by comparison to FP. Their talismans are placed in totally different levels of progression, their crafting options are placed in totally different levels of progression, and the items that don't change weapon or build choice on top of that are incredibly different in terms of usefulness. We have an extra regen shield and armor set for HP. Juxtapose that with Starlight Shards being the most common means of FP regen from items in the world, and you've already got a discrepancy when Starlight Shards are rare, limited per playthrough, and regenerate a finite amount of FP. By comparison, we have raw meat dumplings that give 50% of max health back, but apply poison. These are also rare and limited per playthrough, but we also have the icon shield, which regenerates indefinitely. We have all this on top of several spells and runes that return HP through FP or specific actions while using a Great Rune. We don't have anything close for FP, and that's the problem. If Elden Ring had an ability similar to World of Warcraft's Life Tap, where HP is converted to FP, that would have gone away to increasing the risk and reward of FP-based builds, as well as adding new factors for the consumption of FP in the game. Imagine if, I don't know, a previous From game did something like this. Say a game where we turned health into ammo of some kind. I don't know, it seems like a really great idea could have been had if From simply used a brain cell to create such a concept in a previous game. Maybe a game from 2015. Seriously, they've done this before, and it worked, so why not give it another shot? Now let's get to item rewards and locations being dependent on build. As we all know, Elden Ring has a ton of areas to explore for various items. The problem comes from the sheer number of items that are incredibly build-specific, and thus useless to us if our build doesn't support it. This is relevant to our options as it relates to the content we have these options tied to. Case in point, why would a glass cannon need a talisman that increases casting speed for spells? Seems like a useless reward from a dungeon when you see it like that. Likewise, what is an incantation build going to use a staff for? Why would a dual wielder use a shield? These kinds of questions popped up in Elden Ring a lot by comparison to the older games, because we realized that a majority of the content in the game can be skipped once we know which areas have nothing of value for our build during a particular run. In the Dark Souls trilogy, each game featured a large swath of resources across areas that were largely or completely necessary for progression. Basically, we went through the majority of the content in order to beat the game and get an ending. Elden Ring switches this entirely, as we can skip the majority of the content in order to beat the game and get an ending. Unlike the other games, Elden Ring features a large number of dungeons that are unnecessary for progression and give one item as a reward, with many of these rewards being build-specific in usefulness. If we will use them for our build, it's great. Otherwise, they're just junk to sell. This means our options for content narrow as we replay the game, as we won't want to go through areas that give a reward we won't use, especially given the rune reward imbalance many of the dungeons have. This results in a bloated first playthrough as we explore, with significantly shorter runs as we begin to understand where our stuff actually is compared to all the stuff in the game. Next is how the roundtable vendors outclass all other vendors. We can kill many vendors around the world and dump their bell bearings with the creepy ladies at the table to unlock all their stuff. Sometimes this is preferable to tracking the NPC down like patches, or it simply consolidates the inventory into one place we'll be going to and from anyway. Simply put, there are so many vendors, and once we have the roundtable vendors unlocked, many world vendors become glorified bell bearings. They do break the monotony of returning to the roundtable to sell off junk over and over, but if we want their inventory we have to A. exhaust their supply now before leaving, B. travel to each of them individually, or C. kill them and use their bell bearings at the table ladies. None of these options are good. Option A wastes runes on things we may not want now, but we may not want to travel back to the vendor later. Option B has us wasting time to return to a vendor we found previously, sometimes in an awkward position. Option C works around both option A and B by having their inventory transferred to our hub. However, this negates the whole point of having random vendors around the world with unique inventories by making them no better than an item we turn in for an expanded loot table. If we're supposed to get used to warping to the table over and over anyway for weapon upgrades, why have all the vendors around the world that we have to do a ton of extra work to consolidate their inventories? Again, why is the best option here to murder NPC vendors? Our final point against the options in the game is how a basic start differs from an informed start. When you initially start the game, you will explore at your leisure, unlocking more and more of the map and its content as you go. You'll find some upgrade materials scattered around haphazardly, and begin to notice patterns for where certain things are. By the end of the game, you'll have found a large swath of resources to help you on your journey. When you start an informed run, things take a drastic shift. If you want upgrade materials before you actually start progressing toward the major bosses, you can run around collecting items to heighten your build, or make you overpowered before entering a major location. This is the early grind to maximize your build for what is ahead. Essentially, you'll be spending a long time grabbing materials for improved flasks, weapons, armor, and weapon upgrades, along with talisman, crafting, and rune farming applications. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. At the start of my solo run, I immediately ran to grab the first whetstone for Ashes of War Infusion. Then I went around unlocking the map and Sites of Grace as I grabbed golden seeds littered across the world. As I did this, I also picked up several runes from the many grave sites around, as well as gear I knew I wanted to use, such as the Ultra Greatsword and the Reduvia for Ultra Dragon farming. By the time I was ready to grind, I had 8 + 2 flasks available before I had fought any actual boss. That's not even the maximum strength you can achieve this early in the game if you know what you're doing. This process, on top of dragon farming, makes the introduction to the game a joke with how easy it is to farm all of this stuff and upgrade our character before we've even faced a real challenge. The problems with this are obvious. Imagine if we could begin any Dark Souls game with 2/3 of our total flask count, along with a massive soul farming spot as we wield mega gear we shouldn't have before fighting the earliest boss of each game. Do you think that the Asylum Demon, the Lost Giant, and Udex Gundyr would be a challenge after this? It poses a problem for options because this is such a clearly optimized path that it trumps so many others. Yes, we don't have to progress this way, and we can take it slow like we're obviously intended to in a more natural playthrough. But the fact that we can go to so many places this early and have so much available within a half hour radically breaks balancing in the early and mid game. It's not that we grind like in every other game, it's that it's so easy to do this, not even counting the dragon farming. You can have access to Limgrave, Caelid, Liurnia, Altus Plateau, and Mount Gelmir before we've fought a single boss. That's a lot of upgrade materials, runes, and healing resources to grab before we fight Godric, isn't it? This radically imbalances the opening of the game for every build, as every build can do this to massively overlevel themselves before really doing much in the game. The option to find resources isn't the problem here, it's the sheer amount of resources we can pillage so easily. Even if we don't farm levels, we'll still find massive amounts of runes at the grave sites, tons of seeds and tears for our flasks, and lots of gear just waiting to be taken. This makes Elden Ring the most imbalanced game of the Souls-like genre because we can begin the game with a massive boost. Again, imagine going up against the Asylum Demon with 15 + 3 Estus flasks and a nearly fully upgraded Black Knight halberd. This is just ridiculous for balancing and option's sake, as it destroys consistent difficulty across the game when you have the first phase of the game being the grind, then the first half of the game is a joke because you're over-leveled and over-upgraded for each area until you start getting to the insane stuff in the latter half of the game and its DLC. It's just borked when this option is available without any real challenge or hard locks to prevent this from happening. Now let's get into the second worst aspect of Elden Ring, the content. This will be splatters of major splashes and little droplets, so prepare for a back and forth between the two. We'll begin with a major point of criticism: repeated assets. Specifically, repeated bosses. We fight so many repeated bosses, it gets tiresome. Let's compare, shall we? Dark Souls 1 used the Asylum Demon 3 times, and Seath twice if you want to count that. Dark Souls 2 used Dragon Rider and Ava twice each. Dark Souls 3 used Gundyr twice. So, what about Elden Ring? Elden Ring repeatedly uses Night Knights, Crystalians, Beastmen, Bell-Bearing Hunters, Black Knife Assassins, Bloodhound Knights, Dragons, Cleanrot Knights, Crucible Knights, Deathrite Birds, Demi-Humans, Tree Sentinels, Dragonkin Soldiers, Erdtree Avatars, Burial Watchdogs, Falling Star Beasts, Godskin Boys, Mad Pumpkin Heads, Magma Worms, Misbegotten, Putrid Avatars, Tibia Mariners, Gargoyles, Trolls, Spirit Collar Snails, and even Margit, Godric, the Regal Ancestor, and even Radahn get copies or retools. I'm not against reusing something that worked well as a boss, but by Gwyn this is lazy. So many bosses begin to repeat that you'll start to question if you've beaten them all, or if they've just blended together in your brain. This is an obvious copy and paste problem. The devs made this massive world, and they needed to fill it with bosses. So lots of things got Control-C'd and were placed wherever they needed a boss, and they tweaked the numbers afterward. Now, I'm not against a recurring boss used again as a mini-boss sort of thing. The repeated encounters with the Taurus demons, Capra demons, and the Pursuer are all examples of using a boss and reusing them as an additional challenge later to punctuate how strong the player is getting. Fighting through the Godskin duo over and over, whether together or split, doesn't have the same effect. Then we have the lesser enemies being bosses for some reason. Why would a misbegotten or a troll be considered for a boss when they appear in the early game as enemies? What about the Soldier of Godric? Why does he count? Yes, the trolls could be considered mini-bosses to an extent, but that would be like copying the Black Knight in Undead Burg and pasting him into the Taurus Demon's arena. You've already got them in the level as a non-boss, so why place these in areas where they are already normal enemies or mini-bosses at best? Like I said, they made a world and had to fill it, no matter what. Next up is the limited FP regeneration options. For most of the game, FP regen will be extremely limited, minus the FP's talisman in the DLC. I'm specifically annoyed with the Starlight Shards, as they are not craftable and are finite within the world. The most you'll probably have is 10 on you at once if you make it up to the secret Liurnia area. This is a problem as we have so many craftables that can regenerate health, but we have next to nothing for FP. Even the stuff we have is rare or requires some other action that is imbalanced compared to HP. See my previous rant about all of the HP items versus the FP items. Next is an obvious one as well. Some areas just suck. Prime example, the Lake of Rot. This area is absolutely ridiculous, and only becomes more ridiculous when you realize there is a boss to fight in the Rot. We don't even get Torrent to help out here, even though it's a massive underground cave, and we can ride Torrent around in other massive underground caves. It's not even because of difficulty in dealing with the Rot either. This area is inconsistent with its challenge, as we can run around picking up stuff while chugging flasks or boluses, and when we run out, we just warp back to the side of Grace and do it again until we've got everything. Or we run straight to the opposite side of the area to another side of Grace. I did this on my solo run, and it only used up 1 physic and 4 flasks to get through. It's not even a challenge at this point, it's just a chore. Yes, being in combat stops warping, but the only real challenge here that could stop warping is dealing with the boss, unless you're just uniquely terrible against horn dudes and the basilisks. Next up are arbitrary extensions of playtime. This ranges from all the fast traveling that we'll need to do all the way down to how long some elevators take. These things just exist to pad the playtime in a sneaky way. The elevators don't need to go as slow as they do, same thing with opening doors. Roderica takes an extra long time to become useful, even if you know what you're doing. Then we have things relating to combat that just waste time as well. Medr's black hole laser just delays hitting it if you aren't a caster or use a ranged weapon. You just sit there while you wait for the attack to end. Melania's health steal on hit just prolongs fighting her just to make her harder. Some talismans are behind stone sword key locks while others aren't, and the balancing is all over the place. We also have enemies dodge spamming where we can't hit them, and we just end up wasting resources and time until they calm down and reset. There are many others where I came across something and went, why is this just causing a gap between A and B? Next up is memory stones restricting spell slot allowance. This makes no sense to me. In order to increase our spell slots, we need to run around collecting stones from towers. This is totally better than leveling up our magic FP stat and having that affect our spell slots, right? It's always nice when everyone gets 10 slots for spells no matter what build they have. It's totally balanced and tied to magic builds, I swear. Next we come to another big one, item knowledge on subsequent runs. Once we know where certain gear is, we won't go get it because it's a pain to get to and our build won't use it anyway. Therefore, we ignore the area and/or the boss. This one feature, knowledge of what is useful, radically tanks subsequent playtime. When you know that 90% of the talismans in the game aren't for the build you want to use, you'll ignore most of the additional areas that house the gear you don't want. This drops exploration and completion massively for most after the first playthrough or two, outside of those who simply want to be completionist every time. Another annoying aspect of the content can be the way transporter chests work. For instance, teleporting from Limgrave to a cave in Caelid doesn't exactly make for a fair or balanced encounter, considering Caelid is much tougher than Limgrave, Liurnia, and even Altus Plateau. This is like opening a chest in the High Wall and being teleported to Irithyll. This is just blatantly imbalanced just for the sake of making the player suffer in an area that's probably way beyond their level. Now, some of the puzzles with transporter chests can be fun, and not all transports send you toward pain, but the fact that they do it at all is the problem. At least with the portals it's obvious that you'll go somewhere far away. Now we come to another major problem. Big fights for little reward. The rune scaling for many minor boss fights is barely adequate to outright pocket change. When you can have 20 bosses across a zone, and all of them give similar numbers of runes per kill, eventually they aren't going to be worth it beyond items that we may or may not want to begin with. Not to mention the time put into certain areas, when the reward doesn't make up for the frustration of the kill, on top of the lack of runes. Take the twin burial watchdogs in Caelid near the minor Erd tree. These enemies can be incredibly annoying to fight together unless you know a specific exploit with an item that turns them against each other. This is far better than dealing with their overlapping combos spamming you to death. Just remember, you need this item that is nowhere nearby, and its description doesn't help explain what it can do. Granted, it is available in Liurnia, but it's still such a niche exploit that I can't call it intuitive. But guess what you get as a reward for beating the cat duo? 7,400 runes and a Mad Pumpkin Head summon. The summon can be useful, but that rune amount is pitiful given what level you're supposed to be by the time you hit Caelid. By this point in the game, it takes me roughly 27,000 runes to level up after going through Limgrave and Liurnia before Caelid. Dealing with a duo boss that can overlap attacks and stun lock you into oblivion isn't redeemed by enough runes to give you a quarter of a level. Granted, the exact level range differs depending on when you reach this area, but we're dealing with a trade-off of equally bad options. Runes are too low to justify going through the fight, or it's too difficult to do early game to justify going for the runes. Either way, the rune balancing sucks for most of the minor bosses around the world, particularly in Limgrave, Liurnia, Altus Plateau, and parts of Caelid. Moving on, we have another minor point regarding inconsistent checkpoints. This is rare, but it's still weird when most dungeons have statues of Marika acting as checkpoints before a boss, rather than a site of grace like in Gale Tunnel. It's just a weird choice, even given that this area has a way out near the boss that acts as a backdoor path. It's just a strange moment where I have to wonder why the checkpoint was made this way. A checkpoint here is fine with me, just putting an extra grace here is odd. Another problem of the content is one that goes back through the whole Souls-like series: invisible wall spamming. Whether slapping with weapons, rolling, or spamming interact, it's become a problem across these games where you can never really tell where some illusory walls are. This leads to many awkward moments of slapping everything around you unless there's a message making it obvious. While I wouldn't normally complain about this to this degree, the reason I bring it up is because of the hidden dungeon Celia hideaway that involves a questline. This area is behind an illusory rock face, which means we'll all start second-guessing every other rock face, so we'll be slapping and rolling all over the place to find every secret we can. This can lead to a ton of wasted time slapping everything in sight to make sure we don't miss any secret passages. This is a criticism across all the games that has been largely ignored as far as I can see, so this will never be fixed to work around constant wall humping to find things. I'd recommend a simple difference in animation or texture, similar to how some mimics in the Souls series could be detected via their slow opening of their mouths and by their texture differences in general sometimes. Just something to avoid wall humping forever. Next is niche items being extremely awkward to work with given their requirements. Take several talismans that amplify specific attacks or types of weapons. These can be fine when it comes to boosting attacks, but when it only boosts a particular type of attack, in a particular situation, that funnels players into using that attack primarily, which can lead to the combat becoming somewhat boring depending on the type of attack and what requirements add the bonuses to it. Imagine turning all your attacks into a two-handed attack or just the jump attack. We've reached a point where variety is starting to create an inverse effect given the specific bonuses we can get now. Another minor point is how some of the legendary armaments for the achievement are locked behind inconsistent challenge and prestige. For example, the Darkmoon Greatsword is granted after fulfilling the majority of Ranni's quest until we trigger her at the end of the game. That makes sense since this is an item bestowed by a named character at the end of her questline, which affects an ending. That's pretty high profile. Then we get the Grafted Blade Greatsword after killing the Leonine Misbegotten in Castle Morn. We kill a repeated boss and get a legendary armament from a ruined castle. Then we do this twice over for the Ruins Greatsword and the Golden Order Greatsword, both of which are relatively minor encounters that just fill the void on the map or exist as a bonus fight should we have access to them. It's just strange how this achievement and the content necessary has such a wide gap between requirements. With Ranni, we have to go through all these places and bosses. With the Leonine Swords, we just need to show up in 3 places and beat a boss fight with a repeated enemy. It's very inconsistent. Next is progression through medallions and how imbalanced they are. For example, to get up the lift to Altus Plateau, all we need to do is stroll into a fort in Limgrave and a fort in Caelid and loot a chest to grab each half of a medallion. This lets us bypass any bosses and gives us access to Altus Plateau as soon as we collect these 2 pieces. We essentially have access to 5 zones before we even fight a real boss. This leads to the early game grind that I mentioned before. We also have the medallion given after we defeat Morgott. Granted, that's after a main boss and a major NPC interaction, so no problems there. Then we have the medallion to the consecrated snowfield, and this is where it gets tipsy. One half of the medallion is hidden with a camouflaged guy in an Albinaric village in Liurnia, who will give it freely without protest, or can easily be killed for it. The other half is in a fort behind Commander Nile, an endgame boss, in Mountaintop of the Giants. This is after a dual Lion Warrior fight, and after completing the area. This one piece is protected way more than any other piece we collect, which is my main problem. If each piece of every medallion was behind a boss, I wouldn't have an issue. But one piece is strangely protected, and the other medallions are behind a major boss, and the other did not have its pieces behind bosses. This seems like a random difficulty spike before we reach the consecrated snowfield. If we wanted to be consistent, I would have placed the Albinaric piece of the snowfield medallion behind another boss in Mountaintop of the Giants, or in another level appropriate place. It's just inconsistent to say the least with the way it is now. Now we come to the round table being restricted until we rest at a site of grace outside of Limgrave. Why is this a thing? It's not like we're trapped in Limgrave to begin with and have to fight our way out. It also begs the question, why bother restricting it in the first place if we aren't going to be restricted in immediately progressing to a point where we can access the round table? It's just a stupid restriction and extension of playtime, just to troll us with a Dark Souls-y complication before we access the hub. It's not like it's behind a boss fight like in Dark Souls 1 or 3, or in another dimension like in Bloodborne. We can't go to it because the devs said we can't until we walk around a bit, and that explanation and restriction is just lame. Another point to bring up is how some build items are placed at inappropriate points of progression. Take the talisman that boosts shield block. This is in Altus Plateau, the 4th zone we gain access to. The 4th out of 8, 11 if we count each underground area. Given the restrictions laid on players early game, especially given lower shield stability without better shields and higher stats, this talisman is an immediate necessity given the excessive combos and stamina damage of many enemies leading up to it. Tank builds are slowed down to a ludicrous degree in the early game because of the lack of a good shield and enough stamina to maintain defense in the face of several enemies and bosses with major combos that break through our shield block, even at full strength. Simply put, tank builds have to waste a lot of time recovering from blocking stuff when it would be better to dodge and wait until we get the shield talisman, or ignore everything and get to Altus Plateau to grab the talisman for extra effectiveness in one of the defining traits of that build. Or we can work around it by farming levels to use a better shield in higher end areas, like the Icon Shield or Visage Shield. But that requires farming, and negates using what we spawn with and what's immediately available in Limgrave. If we have to work around the base gear in order for the build to work, we have a problem. Next is the Stone Sword keys unlocking inconsistent rewards. Sometimes they unlock a talisman, sometimes they unlock a dungeon, sometimes they unlock crafting supplies and junk. It's varied to the point of ignoring certain spots once you know what it leads to. See my previous point about ignoring content that doesn't help us or our build. The next major criticism relates to Torrent and his parkour abilities. His speed and jumping prowess is incredibly helpful when traversing the world. His circular space needed to turn around does the opposite. I can't tell you how many times I've tried turning around with Torrent only to have him go in a wide circle, which drops me off the vantage point I'm at and forces me to double jump somewhere to avoid death, or repeating a pathway I've already progressed through. Instead of turning Torrent to an immediate direction like the player can do, Torrent needs room to turn around. This is probably done for balancing purposes during mounted combat, but it also creates problems when parkouring around narrow paths where one bad Torrent turn can lead to issues. The workaround is dismounting, turning around, then remounting Torrent, but that's extremely awkward to do and slows down mounted traversal in general. It's just a bad system for allowing Torrent to move around in such an awkward way that can get players killed. Getting back to another roundtable criticism, having to warp back and forth for weapon upgrades is an absolutely stupid prospect. This is especially evident given we may need to warp as many as 50 times to fully upgrade a single weapon. We warp there and upgrade a weapon once, then we warp back. Repeat a bunch before God Killer weapon is achieved. Again, Dark Souls 1's bonfires had a great mechanical variety to them that has never been surpassed in any game since. From continues to amaze me with their earlier creations having more mechanical effectiveness than their later games that are made with more resources, more experience, and higher budgets. Next is a problem with NPC quest lines and the fact that killing them can be more beneficial than actually going through with their quests. Take Kenneth Haight. We can do his quest for a unique dagger, or we can knock him off the edge for a free golden seed. One is much more useful than the other. Another example is Patches, as killing him immediately gives us access to his wares, including a cookbook that allows us to craft Gold Toe Foul Feet, the item that increases runes gained for a short time, and Margot's Shackle, an item we can use against Margot or Morgott to restrain him for a few moments. Both are helpful, but the former is massively helpful throughout the game to increase our rune count. Another problem is parkour having the annoying momentum problem where we sometimes push away from the structure we're desperately clinging to. This results in a death due to the parkour responding inconsistently based on the movement going on at the time. If we're falling due to a slip, we may slide even farther and fall to our deaths. Great stuff. Next is a major one. Many of the Great Runes suck to get and or use. A prime example is Malenia's Great Rune. It basically activates a rally system after being damaged, similar to Bloodborne's own system, where the last hit's worth of damage can be restored by attacking. I wish Malenia had that effect instead of the OP version, where every attack heals her, but that would be too OP to give to a player, right? Right? We won't even mention that healing flasks are reduced to 85% efficiency during the use of this Great Rune. Basically makes it nearly worthless given that many other Great Runes have no drawback whatsoever. Anyway, this rune requires we beat the hardest boss in the base game, and then travel through a portal to reach another portal to reach the Divine Tower to finally collect it. It's overcomplicated just for the fun of it, and it comes with a trade-off to boot. When compared to the various stat boosts of Godrick's, Radahn's, and Morgoth's Great Rune effects, Malenia's is a joke that will only work when you're already failing by getting hit in the first place, not to mention it effectively decreasing your healing flasks by 1 given the percentage drop. Granted, tank builds will have a good time with this since they're already behind something that mitigates damage, so that is a workaround. Then we have Miquella's Great Rune, which is more of an item to counter Radahn 2.0's Double Hug of Death. That's it, and doesn't even function as a Great Rune, so why call it that? This content just gets confusing sometimes. Now we come to a common issue across the games. Summons can break some enemies. Summoning an NPC, a player, or a spirit can cause a boss to act in strange ways. Attack chains can randomly come towards you at the last possible moment, along with combos picking and choosing who they start and stop on. It's not even based on aggro or damage to the enemy. The enemy just picks a target and might change their mind halfway through a combo. It's a problem I wish they had found a solution to earlier, but it's still present, even after all this time to iron things out. On the flip side of this, summons make some fights ridiculously easy. One of the best summons, Black Knife Taish, has Destined Death and a dodge mechanic, making her extremely deadly to every boss we encounter thanks to her percentage damage debuff and her ability to dodge. Then we have the Mimic tier allowing us to double up on our broken builds. If you have an Ultra Bleed build, you'll now have a backup Ultra Bleed build ready to strike while you recover. The summons really do imbalance the game tremendously, sometimes in the player's favor, sometimes doing the opposite. One major point that ruins the DLC content specifically is the difficulty scaling with the Scatter-Tree fragments and Revered Spirit Ashes. All they do is make the DLC less hard after collecting certain amounts of each. That's it. All they do is boost you or your summons defense and offense. That's it. You may as well had us level up a new stat called Counter BS that would have served the same purpose. It's just a lazy way to crank up the difficulty while also giving the players a way to counteract it. I've never seen something this lazy in a From game before, and it's utterly pathetic. This is arguably one of the things I hate the most about Shadow of the Erdtree, and I'm sure others do too. For our last point regarding the content, we'll go over boss gear requiring stupid high stats to use. Take Renala's gear available. We can either choose a moon spell that requires a whopping 70 intelligence, or we can choose a staff that requires a whopping 60 intelligence. This may be the second shard bearer we defeat at that time. For reference, if we go through all of Limgrave and all of Liurnia before defeating Renala, we can be around level 65 or so before we defeat her. That gives us enough runes to get our intelligence about halfway up to those requirements if we split the other half across weapon stats, HP, FP, and stamina. These requirements are insane, but they aren't alone. R'hllana's Twin Moons require 72 intelligence to use. Land of Shadow requires 58 faith. Mesmer's Orb requires 60 faith. Bale's Flame Lightning requires 53 arcane, and his Tyranny requires 49 arcane. And Light of Miquella requires 72 faith, among many others requiring combos of levels equaling 40 levels or more dedicated to use weapons or spells across the various bosses. I don't mind several of these requirements, but the ones that require a mass dump into a stat are a killer for progression, since you'll be dumping the majority of your levels into these stats to allow use of these special rewards, but these levels will hardly do anything beyond that given how scaling drops significantly as you get into the higher stat ranges. So there you have it. A mass list of complaints about the content of Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree. Can you guess what the number one worst aspect of the game will be yet? That's right, the worst aspect of Elden Ring is its difficulty. If you thought the content section was a problem, just wait to see how broken the difficulty is. We'll begin with an overarching complaint that encompasses all of the following points. Extreme difficulty. This is labeled as such because of everything we're about to get into that constitutes the various ways Elden Ring cranks the difficulty in a way that becomes ridiculous when compared to previous games. Now let's get to specifics. The first boss of the game, the Grafted Scion, shows several problems that will become prominent throughout the game. The first and most unique example is that we attempt this boss with no healing items, outside of spells that hardly do anything. This turns the difficulty into a joke, as we have to almost ace this boss fight if we want to get its gear, even though we're going to die no matter what. This is like Demon Souls opening, but much worse, given our low chance of success, and how many tricks the Scion has up its sleeve. This fight also displays other problems that will come in the attack patterns of bosses, as the Grafted Scion has an attack where it swipes and then moves away from the player. This artificially delays progress in combat by having the boss move away during an opening to attack it, thereby negating the opening for most builds to begin with. This just inflates the time it takes to beat the boss and increases the gap between openings to attack it. This just extends the fight arbitrarily. We see examples of this delaying of combat everywhere, as bosses run or fly away just to delay the fight. Sometimes this is hidden behind a unique attack, like Radahn's Meteor Drop or Bale's circling fireball attack, but it oftentimes just becomes a long sequence of waiting for the boss to be available to attack again. I've mentioned Medr's floating laser attack as a prime example of wasting the player's time if they don't use ranged weapons. We just have to dodge and wait for the attack to finish before we can get back into the actual fight. We also have enemies that spam dodge to get away from us or avoid damage. This is found in several enemies, particularly when firing spells at them. If enemies and bosses will spam dodge as we use spells against them, you're just negating the whole point of the build. If we spend the entire game creating our caster build, whose prime advantage is damage at range, then negating that in the majority of boss fights negates our effectiveness in the thing that makes some builds of the game work the way they do. You are just wasting our resources by having enemies spam the dodge function because the game knows how effective spells can be, but they couldn't think of a better solution than make the enemy dodge over and over to avoid spells. It would be like making a boss that steals your melee weapon or shield during a fight. It just screws up the way your build works and wastes time as you try to use your build against the enemies and bosses when the game itself is working against your build on a mechanical level. To be fair, this doesn't happen with every enemy and boss, but it happens often and becomes incredibly frustrating when most spells are dodged by a boss in the most stereotypical AI counter ever. It's one of the most frustrating moments of immersion being lost when you spam spells and the enemy dodges over and over and over. At least the Tree Sentinel has a counter to spells. At least that's aesthetically and mechanically interesting, unlike other fights. Then we have number extensions to prolong encounters. The Godskin duo fight in Farum Azula is a prime example of extending the fight just for gits and shiggles through overly generous health pools. Once we defeat one or both of the duo, they will resurrect as the boss health bar is much higher than their individual health bars combined. Then we have the fire golems in the DLC that take ages to kill no matter what build you have, as they cycle through the same handful of moves over and over for 5 minutes. This is just to pad the playtime against them and increase the chance of attrition wearing the player down. This is not dynamic, it's just tedious, and many bosses have this issue of overextended health bars. Now let's move on to extreme damage. There are several moves in the game that deal way too much damage in a single hit, or deal far too much damage within a short span of time. Malenia's Waterfowl Dance is an example of a combo with so many hits within a tiny span of time that it comes with a high chance of death once it tags you. It is one of Malenia's moves that radically changes the balancing of the fight when she can bring an extended combo that hits many times over, has no obvious dodge options beyond runaway and pray, as well as it healing her and applying rot in phase 2. Simply put, it's her overpowered move that will usually be the kill shot. Then we have bosses in the DLC that stretch this even farther. I've complained about the massive damage numbers for attacks in the DLC, even after Skippy Tree buffs. All the way from mausoleum fights up to the big bads, these enemies have their numbers cranked just to make things harder, with many of these bosses sporting 2-hit combos that will absolutely kill the player. One particular boss has always gotten under my skin with the overwhelming force of his attacks: Bale. This dragon does way too much damage with some of his moves, particularly his Flying Breath attack and his Lightning Smash moves. Take a look at this fight on my tank run. Nearly first tried Bale, having all my flasks by the end of the fight, and I've only popped my Physic for healing. Then he hits me once. This nearly kills me in a single shot when I'm near 95% of my total health. This would have killed me outright without Morgoth's Great Rune boosting my health up significantly. This is on top of 60 Vigor, Heavy Armor, and Skippy Tree Blessings. The boss should not be able to do this much damage in a single hit, especially as it's part of a combo he can do repeatedly. This is where the balancing of numerical damage to combo number is blatantly broken in the boss's favor. If this will kill players in a single hit without specific Great Rune health bonuses, you've created a boss that hits too hard. If there is no chance to learn the move in the fight, then you're going to frustrate your players when they have to die repeatedly to learn how to deal with the attack properly. We also have problems of extreme damage affecting combos, with several bosses and enemies having each hit dealing upper hundreds or even 1,000 or more damage per strike. This, added with combos, only leads to attack patterns that brutally kick the player apart if they get tagged once and stunned during the duration of the combo. So many layers of difficulty rely on players making as few mistakes as possible, but this game has lowered that mistake threshold to unreasonable depths. We also have the problem of combos going on forever and ever, with openings being dependent on if the boss feels like stopping them, and the general time it takes to find the opening becoming longer and longer, to the point that the vast majority of the fight is spent waiting for the opening and dodging until it appears. Then you get your one hit in, and wait through another 5 to 10 hit combo in order to get your one swipe in again. This is tedious for no other reason than trying to catch the impatient players out, but when combos just keep going on and the openings become more rare and minuscule, players are going to forsake caution just to get some damage out, rather than continue waiting and dodging for a full 15 seconds just to get their 1 second hit in. It just prolongs the inevitable, and becomes a chore to wait for the openings. As I've mentioned several times in previous videos and streams, a good Souls fight is a dance where the two opponents are going back and forth trading blows, with some connecting and others not. When the dance becomes more and more of a one-man show, that balance dwindles with each additional second we're not interacting with the boss beyond dodge again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Now let's get to prolonged AoE moves adding visual clutter and tedium to many boss fights. When bosses trigger their AoE moves that go on and on and on, we spend more time waiting for our openings than we do actually attacking, due to the random nature of some of them and the extended danger of others. We run away for an extended period of time, or we dodge to avoid damage. Sometimes we can't seem to avoid damage, because the attack's area of effect has no clear sign of where it's safe to be. When we've got explosions and animations all over the place, it's hard to find the right spot where it's safe to be. These AoE explosion moves, on top of extended combos and expanded health bars, has led me to coin the term Triple E. This basically stands for Expand, Extend, Explode, and many bosses follow this in a variety of ways. Take any boss of the game, and most will have at least 1 to 2 points from this group, if not all 3. They will feature an expanded health pool, either in a massive amount of HP or some kind of health restoration. They will have an extended attack, either through more hits added to a combo or extended delays to catch you out. Or they will have an explosion effect, whether one massive strike, a prolonged projectile spam, or additional explosions after other attacks. Many bosses use all 3. Radahn 2.0 is a prime example of this at its worst, as he begins with a large health pool and his combos remain lengthy throughout the fight. Then the combos get even longer and add explosive blasts near the end of each of them just for extra get goods. This is on top of several AoE moves that hit once and another prolonged AoE over a large area that persists after the initial explosion. This is blatant overclocking of the boss's moveset because the developers couldn't think of a more strategically interesting idea for this boss by the end of their biggest game's DLC. Even then, they had to rip off a boss they already made to make this fight what it is. The Triple E effect prolongs fights in the many ways I've listed previously, leading to many endgame and DLC fights feeling the same when every boss has a massive health pool, many extended combo sets, and several explosive moves that cause animation clutter on top of everything else. This overclocking of bosses just leads to the endgame feeling incredibly one-note in its difficulty and extremely repetitive. Take the endgame and DLC fights of Demon's Souls, Dark Souls 1, 2, or 3, and you will notice a stark contrast in the way the fights work individually and as a total package by comparison to Elden Ring and its DLC. That is how you notice the consistent problems with Elden Ring's late-game fights. Now that the Triple E is out of the way, let's get to some annoying aspects of boss fights, starting with enemies auto-reacting to our actions. People have mixed and matched the language on what this should technically be called, with many saying it's input reading, but let's just call it what it is. The NPCs automatically reacting to the player's actions. An example we've all felt is when we're far away from the boss, so we expect it's okay to take a swig or a flask. Elden Ring will convince you to stop drinking. So many enemies and bosses have specific moves they use to close the gap and hit you, or chuck a ranged attack that will almost always catch you out even though you are far away and presumably safe from harm. These moves are often faster than our healing animation and begin almost as soon as we trigger the healing animation itself. It's the bosses going, "Oh no you don't." This makes healing that much more annoying to manage when you no longer have a safe opening if you are far away. Instead, you'll have to wait for an opening in a combo, some of which are simply too small to get a flask off anyway. This also makes it feel like the bosses are built to punish you for performing any action. This isn't the same as miscalculating a dodge, or mistiming an opening to strike and being punished for it. This is the game actively punishing you for trying to heal or do some other action. It's not 100% consistent in every boss or enemy as far as I could tell, but the fact that the community has complained about it so much should say something about how prevalent and annoying it is to see. This also extends to summoning, as many boss fights set the boss on you immediately instead of giving you a few seconds to summon before they're on top of you. Then we have moments where the cutscene with the boss can set us up right in front of the boss without room to do anything once the fight starts. Melania has this badly as we begin our first fight with her within striking distance of her. Considering how difficult she is, and the fact that we appear in every subsequent attempt across the arena from her, this first run is blatantly unfair by comparison. This also isn't remedied by dodging either. Summoning takes longer than many boss openings after attacks, so we'll inevitably be hit by the boss unless the boss gives us a rare moment of breathing room. Then comes the problem of breathing room in the boss fight in general. Many bosses, particularly in the late game, give very little time to do anything in between attacks. This leads to the extension of playtime while we wait for openings to do X, Y, or Z. Some fights simply don't have enough room to do anything for extended periods of time, or don't have clear enough indications for the player to understand their openings. Two fights I am particularly pointing at are Morgott and R'hllana. Both fights feature combos that have extensions to them, on top of the boss being very mobile and able to close distances rather quickly. Again, this is if the boss decides to play aggressively or ominously walk toward us instead. These combos going on and having variations within their length and effectiveness leads to players being unsure of their safe zones and how often they will arrive. This leaves everything in the combat to a split-second decision that repeats over and over as the fight goes on. This is good for adrenaline, but not good for openings in a fight when a combo can absolutely destroy you once one of the 12 hits connects. Not every boss has this problem, but many do once you get farther in the game. Next we have the problem with AoE spamming bosses leading to weaker summons. These encounters have most of our summons beaten to a pulp throughout the fight, as many summons do not have a dodge function, and even if they do, they often won't be able to time the dodge right to avoid the AoE around them. This beats up our help when the game desperately wants us to use them, given the high number of summon options and all the upgrades they get in the DLC. It's weird that they'd give us a useful mechanic and then screw it over repeatedly just to make the bosses harder and their attacks look prettier. We also have an issue with ultra tracking attacks that almost teleport bosses into hitting us. This becomes extremely annoying as bosses will wind up, and no matter where we are, they'll spin 180 degrees to make sure they land on us properly. It's the most video gamey immersion breaker next to bots that auto-aim at you. The tracking becomes ridiculous, and just feeds into another core issue of avoiding damage in this game. It's about timing, not strategy. Let's go back to Bale since I've picked on him already. Take his aerial breath attack and how we dodge it. He shoots 3 massive attacks at us that are going to cover the area the player is in. There are no ways around this. He will hit where the player is. Dodging doesn't come down to strategy so much as timing, since these are all just massive explosions moving in different directions. This means the strategy is to hit the iframe button at the right time in the right direction. That's just like most other attacks in the game. Example number 2, Radahn number 2. Take his projection combos. Wherever you are, they will find you, and it's all about hitting the iframe button at the right time and direction, just like many other attacks in the game. Example number 3, Radagon's hammer AoEs. Many of them track wherever you are and will find you, so it's about hitting the iframe button at the right time and direction, just like many other attacks in the game. Example number 4, Estelle's laser beam. It tracks hard, so it's about hitting the iframe button at the right time and direction, just like many other attacks in the game. Example number 5, Ramina's Scarlet AoE. Instantly charges when within melee range, so it's about iframe button at right time and direction. Example number 6, Erdtree Burial Watchdog's Sword Slam attack. Ultra track, so iframe right time and direction, just like others. Example number 7, Draconic Tree Sentinel's Lightning Strike. Ultra track, you know the rest. The ultra tracking removed strategies that appeared in prior games that added more dimensions to combat beyond hit, avoid damage button here, here, and here. Where your character was positioned, where obstacles in the arena were, how your build plays into the optimal range for damage trading, and other factors changed the way you could deal with certain moves by certain bosses in different ways. This kept options open instead of devolving into, just dodge it bro. Next we come to status effects and how they are often applied or added for no real reason than to get good, it's harder now. Take the Twin Gargoyle fight. This fight has two enemies with massive hitboxes, extended reach, alternating movesets, ranged attacks, and overlapping combos, on top of a massive poison AoE that can be sprayed while fighting them. Did you think the two bosses, with massive hitboxes, extended reach, alternating movesets, ranged attacks, and overlapping combos weren't enough? This is just overclocking. Let's jump to a single enemy boss in Melania. Did they think that adding Rot in Phase 2 on top of extreme aggression, health steal, waterfowl, tracking butterfly women, extended combos, high agility, and the Scarlet Aeonia wasn't enough? This is just overclocking, again. Then we have AoE status moves that become annoying to deal with, like with Romina's Insta-Rot AoE, Commander Niall's Frost Explosion, Midra's Frenzy build-up, and Mohg's General Blood Spewing. All these moves or additions do is add another layer of difficulty by having the boss spam a status effect during the fight. This is just the devs thinking of any other way to add damage from the boss to the player on top of what they already created, building another overclocking of difficulty where they just put everything in they can think of. What about adding status effects to an area just for the gits and shiggles? The Lake of Rot comes to mind as we have a boss there, and a mini-boss in the area afterward, that both become much more annoying to face when dealing with Rot buildup and Rot damage. These Rot pools and the lake are just there to facilitate the From status area everyone is supposed to hate. Well, I hate it. You win. Please move on to a more interesting gimmick. Now let's get to NPC combat, specifically against enemies that are people like the player. These enemies fight like all the worst PvP encounters you can imagine. Dodge spamming, delayed attacks, healing, and unique spells and abilities that often stack on top of high damage and health. They just act as a more amped up PvP fight, but without the human interaction. Next up are a few obvious things that pop up from time to time. Some moves are not telegraphed well, where the attack comes through so fast and out of nowhere that you hardly have any time at all to react. I'm thinking mainly of the Erdtree Burial Watchdog's melee attacks, as they twitch so fast that it's almost like the game cuts frames out just to have them hit us. We also have problems with group combat becoming more annoying when we're spammed by several enemies together. Sometimes they'll give them increased damage, health, and reach just to add to the chaos. A major problem is the inconsistencies across builds, with one being the different attacks we can or can't block. The Tree Sentinel charge can't be blocked due to the shifting of the camera and the hitbox of the attack moving past our shield at just the right time to tag us. Even with full block up and lock-on engaged, the game still finds a way to tag us. We have several bosses whose moves can get past our block due to movement of the boss. Look at Gaius and you can see the problems that come from trying to fight him using a shield. His entire body is a hitbox at times, making blocking with a shield a massive risk given he'll probably tag us even if we block the first detection against the shield. Then we have confusion regarding what should and shouldn't be blockable. Why can we block yell attacks with a shield? How does that even make sense? Why can't we block Midra's explosion transition to Phase 2? We've blocked other explosions and status effect blasts before and after this. Then we have bosses being inconsistent within the same combo regarding what is blockable. Take Radigan and his triple hammer slam. The first two are blockable, but the third isn't? Or the third isn't depending on how the game feels? Which is it, and how are we supposed to tell? We have this same problem with our favorite dragon. Bale will sometimes get through our block, sometimes he won't. No idea why this changes. The reason block is so important is because it turns the biggest boss of the DLC into a joke. Radahn 2.0 becomes a glorified poking bag if you stay behind a shield and poke him to death. Unless you have a weak shield, you're pretty much guaranteed a victory against one of the hardest bosses that pulls the most out of his pocket to catch you out. Another way difficulty is borked is because of boss stunlock. Look at the poor Onyx Lord. I nearly stunned him to death in my glass cannon run, and many others fall into this pit of stunnable bosses. Even Melania can't escape us when we trap her in a corner and start the beatings. Now let's talk about mounted combat. It sucks, and we all know it. Unless you're a ranged character, you'll have the same 3-swipe combo with every melee weapon, regardless of type. This makes all melee combat while mounted incredibly dull and repetitive, not to mention how often we fight the same enemies while mounted. Imagine fighting tons of dragons and fire golems in the exact same way while you avoid the exact same moves over and over. Then imagine the fear of getting hit once while riding Torrent, and the stun becomes so horrendous that another hit has time to connect, knocking you off Torrent, and then the boss finishes you off with a final move in a combo. All the while, Torrent froze, and you get killed for making one mistake. Seriously, Torrent is good for parkour, but terrible for combat. He has no poise whatsoever, and disappears if he takes too much damage before he even dies. They clearly did not think of a good way to implement mounted combat, and it shows. Movesets are basic and boring, combat takes so long because of the movements needed to line up attacks and then reset, and Torrent has a marshmallow's worth of poise. He melts as soon as he's tapped, and the giant combo moves from enemies only exacerbate this problem. Mounted combat is basic, boring, tedious, and repetitive. You'd think they could have done something to make it more varied or interesting based on build beyond, you have range stuff and you don't. It's so binary in its functionality, and that sucks in a game with so many build options. Next are flying enemies. These enemies suck, as many of them fly around dragging your camera every which way, then the enemy pecks at you, then flies out of reach of your melee weapons. Then this process repeats. These enemies are terrible to fight, unless you cut them down instantly, or have ranged attacks to avoid the camera hassle. We also have problems with the camera when it comes to enemies that are massive. The golems in the base game have a significant issue, as it's hard to see what move they are planning sometimes due to their height and the distance of the camera behind the player. Finally, there are so many versions of all these problems with the difficulty that stack on top of each other. This just adds the cherry on top of all the ways the game overclocks its difficulty to make the game as hard as possible in repetitive, one-dimensional, and lazy ways. Players need to dodge a 3-hit combo, make Phase 2 have a 7-hit combo that may extend to 8 or 10 depending on RNG. Players think the boss only has one AoE move? Add 15 more ways to blow up the area around the player. Players think the fight is over once the duo is killed? Have them resurrect each other until a bigger health pool is depleted. Players think no single attack can kill them? Have a dragon one-shot them unless they use everything possible to boost their max HP, or give a woman a trackable AoE that can heal the majority of her health while also killing the player. Yeah, that's balanced, right? All these points only add to the developer's biggest problem with the difficulty of this Souls-like series. They're running out of ideas, and they are hitting the brick wall of this difficulty. I and many others have been saying for years that From would eventually have to reinvent the combat of these games, as there is only so much they can do with it before the only increases in difficulty come from number changes. And we've reached extreme number changes. Sekiro had a good idea of changing the combat up, but they need a lot more changes to make their combat consistently engaging again. Simply put, the difficulty is getting boring, and it looks like it's only getting worse. Now that we've completed the list of the top 5 best and worst aspects of Elden Ring, let me know what your thoughts are. I'm keen to see what the reaction will be given the amount of praise and criticism directed toward From Software's mega success. Even after all the negatives I listed, I still have some fun with Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree, but therein lies the problem. Some fun. The Dark Souls trilogy remains engaging to me in its majority, even in its worst moments, because the worst moments are usually one-offs or because of some simple mistakes. Elden Ring has far more moments worth uninstalling and quitting than the other games that came before it, due to its core philosophy. Elden Ring is where From Software broke their formula that worked, and that becomes incredibly depressing to say as Elden Ring sales surpassed From's hopes and dreams, sitting at 30 million copies sold at the time of writing this. Suffice it to say, this will probably continue, and the normies will eat it up without understanding the problems that plague it. I wouldn't be surprised to see From become a figurehead for hard games without realizing what made their games fun to experience before Elden Ring. Demon's Souls and Dark Souls 1 did more for From Software than Elden Ring, both artistically and creatively, and I will stand by that. Everything else is just reformatting what came before and devolving as the series focuses on difficulty rather than challenge. As I sit here today, Elden Ring is worth full price, if you don't care where From Software is headed next. Now that we've gone over everything, let's wrap up with a personal message from little old me to From Software. I've enjoyed your games for several years since picking up the Dark Souls trilogy back in 2017. I've had an incredible amount of fun playing your games, including Demon's Souls, the Dark Souls trilogy, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Elden Ring. However, I've also had a steady rise in annoyances. Now the annoyances outweigh the enjoyment of the challenge. I won't be picking up another From game after Elden Ring, even if I hear it's good. If you'd like a passing remark for the whole video, I'll simply say this. Playing Elden Ring became a chore. Maybe I'm longing for the simple, difficult, but fair approach previous games had with their encounters, instead of overclocking them over and over. Maybe I long for a tighter experience rather than an expansive first run, muddled by bloated subsequent runs once you know what's actually worth doing. Maybe I want simpler mechanics for bosses rather than elaborately animated, but mechanically one-dimensional and tedious fights. To get to the point, I'm looking at the path From Software is walking, and I can't follow anymore. I had fun while I was here, but now I'm done. I don't want to get good anymore. I'll still play the games I have as I still enjoy them, but if Elden Ring is a glimpse into From's future, I don't want any part in it. I awoke from the nightmare, and I can't link the fire anymore. Let's wrap up. I played far too much Elden Ring for this video, and I need to dump it from my hard drive. I had 3 terabytes of footage for this video, so that space will be freed for much more worthwhile content. Based on everything I've already said, I hope you can understand where I'm coming from with my points of criticism and general attitude toward From at this point. If not, leave a comment letting me know how wrong I am. I'm already puckering for the inevitable surge of get goods in the comments. Should be fun to read them. Regardless of that, I hope you enjoyed the video, or at least found it interesting to some degree. Let me know what your top 5 lists would be in the comments, and why. I always enjoy a good discussion. For now, back to the script dungeons from whence I came. To those of you who made it this far, thanks for watching. If you'd like to see my other stuff, there are links to all my channels in the description. The main channel focuses on critical analysis of various mediums. The gaming channel focuses on general playthroughs and chill gaming content. The music channel holds various musical mashups, documentaries, discussions, and original works. The ESAS channel features archives of my Every Saturday a Stream series, which happens, you guessed it, on Saturdays, where I stream whatever and we chat. You can also check out my religious channel where I read the Bible and talk about different stories of how my faith has impacted my life. If any of that sounds interesting to you, feel free to give it a shot. Whether you do or don't, I'd like to thank you again for watching, and God bless.